Half a day of the Committee on Health, Land, Justice, and Culture is now called to order. Today is Wednesday, February 16th, 2022. The time is now 9:00 a.m. Notices for this virtual hearing were published in the Guam Daily Post on Wednesday, February 9th, 2022 for the 5-day notice, and again on Monday, February 14th for the 48-hour notice. The notice was also disseminated via email to all senators and all main media broadcasting outlets on the same days. I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues that are here today. We have Senator Terlaje, Senator Tony Ada, Senator Joanne Brown, and Senator Clint Rangel. Oh, and Senator Chris Duenas, my apologies. I was trying to find everybody. Okay, the general rules of conduct are as follows. The Zoom meeting is hosted by the legislature's AV staff and the Health, Land, Justice, Culture Committee staff, and I want to thank them for their assistance. The host of this hearing will mute all Zoom participants until called upon by the chair. Individuals testifying shall first be recognized by the chair before speaking and begin by stating their name for record-keeping purposes. When called to speak, please ensure that you are unmuted. The agenda items are as follows. Bill number 193-36 COR, sponsored by Senator Clinton Rangel, an act to amend section 24102 of chapter 24, Title 10 Guam Code annotated relative to exempting establishments that harvest and sell honey and honeycomb and adding not-for-profit organizations that provide assistance to agricultural producers from mandated sanitary permit requirements. The second item is Bill number 195-36 COR, sponsored by Senator Clinton Rangel, an act to amend section 35102 of chapter 35, Division 2, Title 10 Guam Code annotated relative to permitting raising poultry or fowl, aquaculture systems, and aquaponic systems in residential areas. So just for the record, I am taking the place, as you can see, for speaker who had asked me to take to chair today for this morning. So now to hear testimony on the first item on the agenda, Bill number 193-36 COR, sponsored by Senator Clinton E. Rangel, an act to amend section 24102 of chapter 24, Title 10 Guam Code annotated relative to exempting establishments that harvest and sell honey and honeycomb and adding not-for-profit organizations that provide assistance to agricultural producers from mandated sanitary permit requirements. Before we hear from those who have signed up to provide testimony, I would like to invite the sponsor of the bill, Senator Clinton Rangel, to please introduce the bill. Senator, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bill number 193-36 COR was introduced by myself because I think it's an important measure because beekeeping and the production of honey has gained interest among Guam's residents. Real honey has been found to be rich in nutrients like niacin and iron, is an alternative to processed refined sugar, and it presents other health benefits due to it having antibacterial and antimicrobial properties. More importantly, it's been found that 1/3 of the world's food production depends on bees and the pollination that bees provide. On the other hand, much of our imported honey sold in stores comes from brands found to be ultra-filtered to the point of no longer containing pollen, with no way to determine whether the honey comes from legitimate sources or if they should even be classified as real honey in some cases. Current law exempts certain establishments that sell unprocessed produce and other products from permits, provided that those products are cultivated on the producer's own property. Beekeepers, however, must obtain sanitary permits in order to produce, harvest, and sell honey and honeycomb. Bill 193-36 COR aims to extend those same exemptions to beekeepers so that we can promote the cultivation of honey on Guam and provide locally produced real honey to our island's residents. I ask my colleagues to support this measure, as assisting our local beekeepers in providing honey, honeycomb, and other products to our island's residents is ultimately good for Guam. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you, Senator Rangel. Now we will accept testimony from those on the panel, beginning with Director Chelsea Munyabrak from the Department of Agriculture. Good morning, Chelsea. You're recognized.
Good morning, Senators. Let me bring it up. Sorry. Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony today on Bill number 193-36. Within the last 3 to 5 years, the beekeeping community has grown drastically from providing agricultural contributions in the ecosystems they preserve to producing honey on the shelves of local supermarkets and mom and pop stores. The fruits of labor from these hives are seen throughout the community. Bill number 193-36 COR provides the opportunity for beekeepers to take their produce literally straight to the market. A beekeeper selling honey on the side of the road is not a food establishment. It is local produce being sold. Bill number 193-36 makes that statement and provides that simplicity. In line with the Department of Agriculture's mission to develop and protect the island's agriculture and natural resources, the department supports this bill. As we look toward building a more sustainable and food secure economy, we must encourage more agricultural industry, and the produce from these beekeepers are part of that growth. Suzus Masi.
Suzus Masi, Chelsea, Director Brecht. So now we'd like to hear testimony from Thomas Ado, Chief Environmental Public Health Officer, Division of Environmental Health from the Department of Public Health and Social Services. Good morning, Tom. You're welcome. You're recognized.
Thank you. Good morning, Senator. Thank you very much. Half a day. Sorry, let me get my notes correct. Oh, by the way, I believe our written testimony was submitted to the office, to the Speaker's office, and I believe it's posted, if not mistaken, on the chat. Would that be correct? Just for clarification.
On the drive for my colleagues, so it has been posted in the drive, but we can potentially put it on the chat too as well.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Senator Perez. So half a day, Senator Sabina Perez, Senator Clinton Rogel, Senator Taitigui, Senator Brown, and make sure I don't forget anyone else, Senator Torres, and the rest of the legislature members of the Committee on Health, Land, Justice, and Culture. I am Tom Nadeau, the Chief Environmental Public Health Officer with the Department of Public Health and Social Services. On behalf of Arthur U. San Agustin, the Director of Department of Public Health and Social Services, we'd like to thank you for allowing us the opportunity to present our testimony of Bill 193-36, an act to amend Section 24102 of Chapter 24, Title 10 GCA, relative to exempting establishments that harvest and sell honey and honeycomb, and adding not-for-profit organizations that provide assistance to agricultural producers from mandated sanitary permit requirements. The Department of Public Health and Social Services, through the activities of the Division of Environmental Health, also known as DEH, has been entrusted to protect the public from diseases and other adverse health conditions caused by the consumption of contaminated foods. DEH does this through the regulatory control of commercial food establishments, such as food manufacturers and processors. Food establishments are required to obtain a sanitary permit from public health by first undergoing a pre-operational inspection to ensure all the physical requirements, such as running water, toilet facility, hand washing sink, and other structures and equipment are present in the establishment. After receiving the sanitary permit, the food establishment is inspected as often as possible and or necessary to ensure compliance with applicable rules and regulations. As written and proposed in Bill 193-36, the inclusion of honey and honeycomb in subsection 24102C, which lists all the items that are excluded from obtaining a sanitary permit, and thus regulatory oversight, will not be a concern to us since all the items listed in the section apply only to unprocessed products. Thus, our concern of possible contamination to these items will be minimal, if at all. However, we suspect that is not the intended purpose of Bill 193-36, as it would be difficult, if not impossible, to sell honey without some form or level of processing. For example, the transfer of raw honey into a bottle or jar, or cutting the comb into pieces is a form of processing and thus will require a sanitary permit. If our hunch is true, and if changes are going to be made to Bill 193-36 further, so to remove public health regulatory oversight for the processing of honey, then the department will oppose to such proposed legislation as it would undermine DEH's responsibility in protecting the public from potential foodborne illness. Most U.S. states require licensing and inspection of beekeepers and honey producers to help maintain safe conditions and operation of facilities so that the health of the community is not at risk. Raw honey can undergo substantial processing, which includes extraction from honeycombs, straining to remove beeswax and dead bees, and packaging or bottling prior to being sold and consumed. This is unlike whole fruits and vegetables that are currently exempt from sanitary permit requirements on Guam because they are sold unprocessed and uncut. Some honey producers that cut honeycombs in smaller portions and packages to them prior to selling to, I'm sorry, let me read that again. Some honey producers cut honeycombs into smaller portions and package them prior to selling to customers. These processes that honey and honeycomb undergo increase the risk for contamination, including physical and chemical contaminants. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration, otherwise known as FDA, guidance document entitled Current Good Manufacturing Practice, Hazard Analysis, and Risk-Based Preventive Controls for Human Food indicates that the following contaminants may be present in honey. Physical contaminants such as metal, plastic, glass from straining or packaging. Chemical contaminants such as sulfites, yellow number 5, drug residues, and pesticides. And biological contaminants such as Clostridium botulinum. The most serious health issue related to honey is the risk of contamination from Clostridium botulinum spores, which causes botulism. Botulism is a rare neuroparalytic disease caused by a neurotoxin that is produced by this bacterium. Botulism develops if a person ingests the toxin or if the organism grows in the intestines and the toxin is released. The signs and symptoms of botulism are so severe and life-threatening that a single case is considered an outbreak. Younger children than 2 years are especially at risk for botulism because they have an immature gastrointestinal system that allows the spores of this bacteria to produce toxins. Public health understands that honey has inherent antiseptic properties that make it a non-potentially hazardous food, and public health acknowledges that there is no available data of foodborne illness outbreaks related to honey occurring on Guam. However, the department is concerned of the risk of contamination during honey processing and packaging, and the lack of or insufficient labeling of these products, which is regulated by also Title 10 GCA Chapter 40, otherwise known as the Guam Food and Drug Cosmetic Act, and the Federal FD&C Act. The introduction of physical, chemical, and biological contaminants in honey can be prevented through compliance with food safety regulations such as Guam Food Code and the regulations governing food manufacturing. These regulations require operators to demonstrate food safety knowledge and perform the following duties. Protect food and food contact surfaces from physical, chemical, and biological contamination during preparation, dispensing, packaging, storage, display, and transportation. Ensure food contact surfaces are properly washed, rinsed, and sanitized. Provide proper labeling of food products. Assess employee personal cleanliness and health and restrict or exclude sick employees. Implement adequate pest control procedures and maintain cleanliness and sanitary condition of the physical facilities and surrounding equipment environment. The CDC has long identified poor employee hygiene and health, contaminated utensils and equipment, and food from unsafe sources as the 3 of the major risk factors that contribute to foodborne illness. These risk factors will not be addressed if honey and honeycomb producers and sellers are exempted from requiring sanitary permits. Granting honey producers and sellers an exemption from sanitary permit requirements will exempt them from all food safety requirements and sanitation inspections. This will hinder DH's ability to perform its duties of protecting the public from environmental health hazards. It will remove regulatory oversight to ensure employee health and hygiene and to prevent contamination of food, utensils, and equipment from animals or pets, pests, dust, and other environmental factors that may be present in these facilities. It will also remove the assurance that food is prepared using potable water, that these facilities have adequate facility for washing, cleaning, and sanitizing equipment and utensils, and wastewater systems in these facilities are sufficient to meet the demands of the operation to prevent sewage backup and other imminent health hazards that may pose a threat to public health. Clostridium botulinum is known to be ubiquitous in all the factors mentioned above to contribute to the increased potential of honey and honeycomb to be contaminated with this bacterium in these types of settings. It is also important to note that Guam currently does not have the capacity to test for Clostridium botulinum in laboratories since they do not have the equipment, materials, and the expertise to test for organism and the toxin that it produces. Samples have to be shipped off island to be tested and confirmed. The time it takes for confirmatory testing will adversely affect outbreak response and treatment. Accurate and consistent labeling of honey and honey products is required pursuant to the local and federal Food and Drug Cosmetic Act. This helps to ensure that honey and honey products are not adulterated or misbranded and enhance the consumer's ability to make informed choices among products. Due to the concerns of infant botulism, it is imperative that honey products are properly labeled. It is also important to note that Bill 193-36 conflicts with Title 10 GCA Chapter 21, Section 21101H, which states that requirements for sanitary permit shall not apply to the operation of any establishment, including any market, wayside stand, or roadside stand used exclusively for sale of fresh, unprocessed fruits, vegetables, and nuts, eggs, live poultry, live pigs, other live animals, except dogs and cats, and other animals as stipulated by the director, by the original producer of his own property, and or liquor canned or bottled soft drink. As an alternative to Bill 193-36 for its intended purpose, Public Health recommends the development of regulations specific to honey and honey producer that will recognize the inherent safety of honey, public health concerns for contamination, the financial constraint that honey producers may have with existing regulations, such as separate kitchen, multiple warewashing sinks, hot water, and etc., to address other concern of honest labeling. DEH is willing to work with local honey producers to develop such regulation. And I do apologize, there's on the attachment that we gave for our testimony, there's a last page that's missing, which is basically our signature, and to thank the committee for giving us the opportunity to comment on Bill 193-36, Jesus Maasi. And also with me, I have one of my staff, Mr. Jerome Garcia. He is an acting supervisor for the Environment Public Health Office of the Division of Environmental Health, to also to assist any questions that may be asked during the hearing. Thank you very much. Jesus Maasi.
All right, thank you so much, Chief Nadeau. And if you could stay on for questions. So we have on the list Jerome Garcia. Are you here to testify in addition to Mr. Nadeau's test? Are you going to add to his testimony, or are you here to answer questions?
Hello. Good morning, everyone. I'm just here to assist Tom and answer any questions that anyone may have. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So the next one on the list, let me take my list out. Christopher Rosario from the Guam Beekeepers Association. Good morning. You're recognized, Christopher.
Hi. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for again introducing this bill. And first and foremost, I guess I would like to again acknowledge that over the past 8 years since I've been doing research on bees in Guam, really there's been a huge growth in the apiculture industry, thanks to, again, to all the supporters. I did want to give my own oral testimony instead of reading the letter that's been written. I believe I'll have Paul, our vice president of the Guam Beekeepers Association, to make I guess present the letter. First and foremost, I guess I'd like to just kind of talk a little bit about the history of honey and how it's kind of lost its use over the past 20th century. So, honey dressings for wound care was actually an everyday part of our history, going all the way back to the early Egyptian times. But since the invention of antibiotics over the time, honey has gradually decreased. And so just several factors that I really wanted to mention here. I know if we get literally into the science as to why honey was used back in the day, we can kind of understand we want to understand its properties. And so given that a lot of the honey in several states have been able to be exempt without a sanitary permit. And so again, some of the factors that are involved the antibacterial activity of honey is the osmotic pressure. If you look behind here, behind me is a cell, and it's a bacterial cell with a flagellum. And so first and foremost, I'd like to talk about the osmotic pressure and the low water activity of honey. And so the osmotic pressure, because honey, when we think honey is very viscous. And so what happens when it is introduced with bacteria, it basically sucks the water out of the cell of the bacteria, hence inhibiting growth of bacteria. And then also we mentioned because of the low water activity in honey, it's the osmotic pressure again, because it is in an environment where honey, again, there's no water. Again, it'll draw the water out of the bacteria. The next one is the acidity of honey. Honey is between 4.5 to 5 in the acidity and has a very low pH. So that in itself is already antibacterial in terms of applications. And then, of course, hydrogen peroxide is the next one. Phenolic acids, methylglyoxal. These are other agents that have been proven to be antibacterial. So I guess that's my individual oral testimony. I know I went into very big specifics here, but again, diving into the science behind why honey has been used over over centuries gives us a reason to be able to exempt honey producers from a sanitary permit. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Christopher, for your testimony. So now I would like to recognize the next person on the list, Ernie Westick, who's the Vice President of the Guam Farmers Association. You're recognized, Ernie. Is he still here?
Hey, good morning, Senator Sabrina Perez and all of you, Senator Lizelle, Joanne Brown, and Drainette, and Ms. Hey, good morning, and Amanda Shelton. You know, this is having a permit. When processing, it's all right to do the permit, but when harvesting, you don't want to discourage farmers to do it. When harvesting, I don't think they require a permit for that. It's just like harvesting corn. You don't get the permit to harvest corn. But when you're processing it, then it must be required to have permit. Otherwise, I'm in favor with this Bill 192-36. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ernie, for your testimony. So I'd like to recognize Senator Amanda Shelton and Senator Mary Torres, who has joined us here today. Okay, so next on the list, we have, I think, Thalia Ganj. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. You are recognized.
Thank you. I'm Thalia Ganji. I'm the business manager from Farm to Table Guam Corporation. I've been working with this organization since it formed in 2011, 2012, and we represent a lot of farmers that work with us, mainly startup farmers that want to get going farming. Some of them have had no prior farming experience, but our organization's purpose is to help expand farming on the island, restore farming knowledge, help people learn sustainable farming practices. The whole concept of honey and eggs and poultry is exciting to us. I grew up in Oregon before I moved here in the 80s. Honey was everywhere. I lived in a rural area. Every farm had honey, sold honey. You could go and get it in your own containers, or sometimes the farmer would give you their containers. Nobody thought anything of it. And that was just a very common rural practice. I'm sitting here looking at the Oregon label requirements for extracted honey in my hand. And anybody that has 20 hives or less is exempt from any kind of regulation if they're selling farm direct to customers. And if they have more than 20 hives, they can elect to be exempt from licensing and inspection if they're selling to farm direct venues. So for example, if they were selling through the Farmers Co-op or through Farm to Table or another organization like that. And that is because we do really carefully track our participants, and we know the origin of everything that goes through our organizations. And we also require labels, and Oregon does too. And I think that's something that Guam could definitely consider, requiring the labels, which I don't think I've ever seen any honey farmer that doesn't label their products. And so, as long as everyone's labeling everything, putting their farm organization name and number and contact information on it, that's just fine. And I don't know too many honey operations that have a lot more than 20 hives. I think there are a few though, and I hope there are. That's great. I want expansion in the honey business. But we don't represent only honey farmers. We're talking about other things in this bill. The expansion of the produce farms and the ability for other produce farmers to be able to participate through organizations such as the nonprofits, the Farmers Co-op, and Farm to Table. So we're speaking on that topic as well. And this is very important. We've helped so many farmers to be able to grow to the ability to conduct profitable business over the years. We have currently more than 25 participating farms with our organization. They couldn't start up and farm if it wasn't for organizations like ours, or the Farmers Co-op, or Amit Farm, or some of these other nonprofits that are enabling them to do their business from startup to viability. So this bill is very important. It's enabling so many things to get going. We live by this premise. Eat what's grown here, not what's flown here. We need the expansion of local produce and local farm products. And so if we look at our plates, we still have only about 5% to less, maybe between 5 to 10% locally grown food being produced here. And if what's on our plate at home is not that much, what can we expand? Make room for more. I think this bill will make room for more. So that's what I'm in support of, and our organization supports it.
All right, thank you, Thalia, for your testimony. Next on the list, we have Olympia Terrell from the Guam Beekeepers Association. Good morning, Olympia. You're recognized.
Oh, good morning. I'm just here on behalf of the association to answer any questions that I might answer or might come out to us. But I do believe that Guam beekeepers are mostly small operations, and that the threat of botulism, of course, is there, but it's very minimal because of what Christopher Rosario explained about the properties of honey. And also, the people who are affected by this botulism are children under 1 year of age, because their digestive system has not developed enough to be able to take care of the invader, so to speak. So I do believe honey is a very safe product. I do believe in public health and taking care and making sure that people are not subjected to poisons in their food. But I do think that allowing a cottage industry of honey sales is important and warranted for the beekeepers. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Olympia. Are there anyone else that would like to testify on Bill 193? Please raise your hand so you can be recognized. Okay, I see somebody. Yes, my apologies, Matthew Baza from Gita. You're recognized. Good morning, Matthew.
Good morning, Speaker Perez and all senators. Yes, Mel Mendiola, the CEO, Gita CEO, asked me to read her prepared written testimony for her. I know the testimony was just forwarded to the Speaker's office as well. So I'm sure that will be distributed out to all the senators. Hafiday, Speaker Terlaje, of course, and Senator Perez, and members of the Committee on Health, Land, Justice, and Culture. And thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony in support of Bill 193. The Guam Economic Development Authority sees the potential Bill 193 has to create additional commercial agriculture opportunities in Guam. Bill 193 will promote further expansion in already growing trends in community-supported agriculture and new agriculture activities, including beekeeping. This in turn will allow for our local agriculture producers to more easily sell fresh, unprocessed fruit, vegetables, and other agriculture products direct to consumers. As we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated several of the challenges far-flung island communities such as Guam face. The need to create a robust and sustainable agriculture industry is crucial now more than ever, especially in light of the recent supply chain issues being faced locally, nationally, and internationally. Bill 193 is an incremental step towards empowering our agriculture industry to grow and flourish, and I respectfully urge the members of the 36th Guam Legislature to support its enactment into law. Si Zeus Masi, signed Melanie Mendiola, CEO Administrator of GIDA.
This is Masi, Matthew, and to Gita for their testimony. Okay, so are there anyone else who would like to testify that has not signed up? I'm looking, okay, I don't see a hand. All right, so we'll move on to the questions, or at least the next phase of this hearing. So the Legal Bureau's review and recommendations. A preliminary review was received by the Legislative Legal Bureau with stylistic suggestions and a suggestion to define community-supported agricultural groups in the bill. So that's one of their suggestions, is to clarify what is a community-supported agricultural group. The next item we received was the fiscal impact note from BBMR. It stated, should this proposed legislation pass, not-for-profit organizations that work with local farmers and establishments that locally harvest and sell honey and honeycomb shall be exempt from sanitary permits. The Department of Public Health and Social Services, Division of Environmental Health, administers new and renewal applications for sanitary permits for all health-regulated establishments. Pursuant to existing law, all sanitary permits expire June 30th of every year. The sanitary permit fee ranges from $220 to $290 or more, depending on the number of employees. As illustrated above, there may be a slight fiscal impact to Department of Public Health resulting from the exemption of sanitary permits for establishments that harvest and sell honey and honeycomb and not-for-profit organizations that provide assistance to agricultural producers. However, absent pertinent information from Department of Public Health and Social Services, the Bureau is unable to determine an appropriate fiscal impact at this time. Okay. All right, so some questions to Department of Public Health. I mean, obviously, BBMR provided some sort of information. Are there other fiscal or other impacts that you foresee with the exemption of sanitary permits with this bill? This is to Chief Nadeau.
I'm sorry, Senator, I didn't quite understand the question. Did we participate in the fiscal note? Was that the question?
Can you basically provide feedback on the fiscal impact that was given with the exemption of sanitary permits with this bill?
Right. So first we recognized there are honey being sold locally in the market, and there, to my knowledge, to my understanding, there isn't anyone who is currently permitted to do so. So essentially, they're in violation. But beside that, my understanding is the impact would be based upon the number of individuals or businesses wanting to sell honey commercially. So it'd be dependent on the number. And I don't have the number. Maybe the Beekeepers Association has that number. So whatever that number may be, times the current fee schedule, which is $290 per permit, and that'll be the fiscal impact in terms of revenue loss, assuming they would all be interested in getting a sanitary permit. And also, I'm sorry, and also a health certificate for individuals who be actually involved in the processing, and possibly even a manager certification, depending on the role they play.
Okay. And how much is the health permit?
A health certificate, it is the training, the certificate itself is $10, and the food safety training is $15, so $25. So it equates to $25.
Okay. All right, thanks. And then in your testimony, you were talking about botulism. And can you clarify what is botulism?
Sure. Well, first, I'd like to make it clear and emphasize that we're not questioning the natural antimicrobial properties of honey. We also believe and stand behind the science of honey. That's not our concern. Our concern is the processing, the individual or individuals that's producing the honey. Those are concerned. And botulism is a disease caused by the toxin created by the bacteria, Clostridium botulinum. It's everywhere, really. It's a concern in the sense that if a certain food is not handled properly, it's under certain condition, it can potentially cause botulism, which is highly dangerous and very immediate intoxication. That's a concern, and it's true. It's minimal. The chances are rare. I don't recall any cases on Guam related to food involving botulism. But the hallmark of public health, environmental health, is prevention. So even one case could be prevented from having to do a regulatory oversight. I think would be worth the effort and commitment investment to the island. Jerome, do you have anything to contribute to botulism, the bacteria, Clostridium botulinum? You want to share with the senator?
Okay, yeah, Jerome, you can add to that.
So hello, everyone. Again, my name is Jerome from Environmental Health. So Tom pretty much covered all of the basics for the bacteria, Clostridium botulinum. However, he is right in that even though it's minimal, it is highly dangerous. So even if someone is affected and it's cured or treated through an antitoxin, those effects cannot immediately be healed. It takes months for someone to recover, especially if it affects major organs of the body, because it does cause severe paralytic effects on the body. And actually, those who have been treated, there are survival complications because, again, like I mentioned, parts of the body that have been affected with that paralysis just causes risk of infection for other parts of the body. So it is very, I guess, severe in the fact that if you, like I said, if it is minimal, but if you do get it, the mortality rates is pretty high. But aside from that, all the basics for Clostridium botulinum has been covered.
And Senator, also, if I may add, our concern, granted, is of course botulism, but beyond that, our bigger concern is the physical contaminants or the chemical contaminants from the processing of honey, not the product itself, but actually the processing. We entrust that everyone here, all the beekeepers and everyone we buy honey from, have the basic sanitation, have the basic equipment, have the facility to do so. But without regulatory oversight, we have no idea. There are people on this island still that have no power and or water. And we come across situations where people literally utilize the restroom in their yard. They don't have the infrastructure to basically do the basic sanitation, let alone start up a business if they want to do so without regulatory oversight. And that's our biggest concern. Botulism is concerned, definitely, absolutely, but our bigger concern is your general lack of sanitation that might occur in the production of honey. That's our biggest concern. It's not the product, it's not so much the botulinum intoxication, but the processing and the individuals or lack of facility to do so.
All right, thank you, Chief. Paul, you had your hand raised. Did you want to add something to the conversation here?
Yes, Senator, thank you. We submitted written testimony and we can read that into the record if that's required, but I'd like to address the botulism issue, which is just one of potential bacterial contamination, and kind of explain what processing honey means. As Chris mentioned, the honey itself is antiseptic. It kills bacteria. If there are botulism spores in the environment that end up in the honey, they may stay viable. They don't start to produce colonies unless the honey is exposed to water, for instance, if it's diluted. Botulism is not an issue unless it's, Olympia mentioned, to very small children. and it hasn't been an issue elsewhere. In addition, we're the Beekeepers Association. We're not opposed to regulations of the industry. Most states have exempt small quantity beekeepers, producers, because there are such extreme low risks associated with bottling honey, which is really the only processing there is. You extract honey from the comb and then you put it in a bottle. I call it kind of a self-regulating industry, because if you don't work clean, if you don't keep your work environment very clean, your honey room is going to be infested by ants very quickly. And that's going to hamper your operations very quickly. So we all work very clean, because if you don't, it's going to affect your operations. So the beauty of raw honey is that it actually, if it were to touch any contaminated utensils, say we extract honey into a pot, and that pot was not treated with bleach or disinfected, and let's assume it has some bacteria in there that would make any other food go bad, that food would start rotting, the honey actually kills those bacteria. So the honey itself is the disinfectant of the equipment that you're using. The only risk is if you have any foreign matters, such as ants or roaches or anything getting into your honey. And that's it's a lot easier to deal with, because that's visible. Your bacteria are invisible. So Tom mentioned most states have some regulations, and I think those are good. The inspections, however, are mainly, most states have requirements for beekeeper inspections, because every state in the United States and most every country in the world, bees are affected by something called varroa mites. It's a very small mite that affects hives, and these mites can travel from hive to hive. And that's where those inspections, the apiary inspectors are trained to identify diseases of the bees, diseases that affect colonies, not diseases that affect people, because there really aren't any. There are no known cases of huge infectious diseases spreading because of honey consumption. So again, we're not opposed to any kind of specific honey regulation. I think, all beekeepers, and as an association, our job is to educate our members as well, on how it's processed, the sanitary requirements, but also helping beekeepers be able to navigate the requirements, the labeling requirements, and so on. So again, minimal risk. I think this honey is a perfect food. It has no shelf life, basically. When it's bottled, it stays good forever. You don't have to refrigerate it. You don't have to treat it, because it's antibacterial, antiviral. Nothing grows in it. And it's a very safe food, and it tastes great.
All right, thank you, Paul, for your testimony. Okay, so the next question is to Department of Agriculture. The Guam Legislature's Legal Bureau recommended defining, quote, community-supported agricultural groups, unquote. Do you have any comments on that and suggestions to better define this term? Director Chelsea.
I am aware of community-supported agricultural groups. Farm to Table is one, Guahan Sustainable Culture, even the Farmers Co-op. These are entities that are supported by the community, sort of created of the community. I'd be happy to work with any of them and all of them to provide a definition if one is needed for the bill.
Very much appreciate that. So the other question is somehow related to the previous question. Who are the nonprofit community-supported ag groups on Guam currently assisting with the consolidation and or distribution of these products for sale to customers? And this is to also Director Breck.
That would be the same, the groups we just mentioned, the Farmers Cooperative, Guahan Sustainable, and Farm to Table.
Okay, thank you. All right, no questions no further questions from me, but I'd like to open up the floor to my colleagues. starting with Senator Tony Ada, if you have any questions for the panel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have any questions at this time. I'll just continue to listen. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Senator Taitigui, if you have any questions or comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning. And good morning to everyone who's on this Zoom public hearing. Appreciate all the testimonies. I can say I'm a big fan when it comes to bees and honeys and protecting their environment. As Paul knows, I've had a situation where I've had bees in a container that was there for quite a bit of time and had them removed safely, and appreciate the work that the honeybees group is doing out there in Guam and promoting this type of industry. Most of my questions were answered, and especially at the last end on the expiration date, Paul, I was going to ask you, what is this shelf life? And you answered that. However, you mentioned other states and jurisdictions. I don't know, Tom, if you've had an opportunity to look at those other states and jurisdictions on what the guidelines are. I can understand the issue with bottling, ensuring that these bottles are sanitized correctly before storing them in the honey into the jars. That could be an issue. But have you had an opportunity, Tom, to look at other jurisdictions like Hawaii, similar to our type of environment here in Guam? Hawaii is an example.
Yes, I have not personally. The individual who did the research for our division, unfortunately, she's currently off island, so she has that information, unless Jerome can contribute to that, but we have not. But on that subject, Senator, we're more than happy to work with the association to develop regulations specific to this. And Mr. Packby, or Paul, who by the way, I need to acknowledge, I mean, he's been very helpful in giving us information about honey and learning how the industry works and the operation behind it. We learned a lot from him. And I think we can create regulations specific to honey that can address everyone's interest. For example, like I know there are restrictions expressed by many saying they don't want to invest in a 3-compartment sink, or they don't have the right facility for it. We can acknowledge that, and we could be addressed through a sound regulations that could address everyone's concern. Granted, there will be compromises here and there, but overall, I think it could be everyone's benefit that there is some kind of regulatory oversight through regulations. And I know other jurisdictions have done so. The extent could be based upon the operation, and we're more than happy to work with the association to create regulations specific to honey. To answer your question, Senator, I personally don't have anything in front of me to share with you, but I know that other jurisdictions do have, certain amount of sanitation concerns. And Paul's correct. You may not want to use certain antiseptics or a sanitizer in the operation, but we don't know what people do in their kitchen when they're producing these honey.
Tom, how many do you have registered at Public Health as producers for honey for sale?
0.
But yet they're selling it right now.
Correct. It's essentially they're doing so violating our food regulations.
Have you sanctioned any of these companies at all that are selling? Because I see honey made in Guam, on the shelves of Payless and other locations.
Well, I didn't know the extent of the honey industry on Guam until I met Paul, and I thank him for enlightening us. We had no idea it was this large. I thought it was, in fact, I didn't realize the honey is being sold on the major retailer was actually produced on Guam, manufactured on Guam. And I had no idea until the legislation came out, proposed legislation came out, speaking to Paul. So we were surprised. And I think this is another reason why I think we need to have regulatory oversight and allow us to create regulations specific to honey. And I believe we can make it happen. We're going to work with Paul and everyone else on this call and the association, where we can come to a happy medium.
Okay, in the meantime, okay, go ahead, Paul. Paul, you had your hand raised, you're muted still? Yeah.
Okay, here I am, unmuted. I wouldn't call the industry large, Tom. I think there's a few small producers. Most honey is sold, like my honey, out of my office only. Very limited quantities, very, very controlled. And as I mentioned, we're not opposed to having regulation dealing with the honey industry, which is a very small industry. Right now, it's not permitted because, frankly, if producers, basically beekeepers, and it's a need. In my particular case, I started having bees because, and I mentioned varroa mite earlier. The reason I got into beekeeping is because Guam is one of 2 areas in the world where we do not have varroa mites, Guam and Australia. Everywhere else, there's varroa mites. So it's a pretty special place to keep bees. The bees that we have been unaffected by varroa. So from a research perspective, that's why a lot of us got involved. I know Chris and I have been doing a lot of work in getting data. Again, the risk is minimal. And so we got involved into selling honey because on Guam, you only can give away so much before your friends and family start feeling embarrassed to ask you for honey. They want to pay you for your honey. And so you need to invest into, okay, how am I going to package it, to do your labeling, small business, kind of out of the back of the garage, like how can I make something that looks nice? But the bottom line is, and what this bill is about, is to decriminalize small producers like myself from being able to do that, like most states, most countries in the world have. There are no risks to the public, really, from raw honey that's being produced in locales around the world. So yes, we should look into maybe, come up with a regulation if public health really wants to educate beekeepers in the future. The Guam Beekeepers Association definitely wants to partner up with you on that. Maybe we can come up with a regulation specifically for this very small cottage industry, because maybe one day we will grow it to a bigger one, because there's definitely a need for it amongst our visitors also. I'm definitely for that, but I believe this particular bill is a good venue, a good avenue to kind of decriminalize it, knowing that whatever's occurring already on the dark market, the farmers markets out there, there's tailgate on the side of the road, we recognize that that's not endangering the public. So let's get this on the books, let's get this approved, and then from there on we can move forward and maybe create a specific honey bill that can regulate the industry on Guam.
Thank you so much for that, Tom, Paul, and Tom, for your answer as well. I think that makes a lot of sense. This market can actually grow. And if we're going to get started with something like this and people more interested in it, as you say, many people are deciding to look into doing this type of industry, then if we get started, we should start on the right foot and create any kind of rules that will assist but not hinder, the process of something like this. So I appreciate those comments, and I hope that this legislation will incorporate some of those suggestions that are in there, and also keep in mind the safety of the public as well. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity, and thank you everyone for being here to testify.
Right, thank you, Senator Tadigui. Senator Joanne Brown, you're recognized. If you have any questions or comments for the panel.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Certainly also appreciate the testimony that's been provided. I think I'm sure there's a workable solution, especially for small growers with regards to honey. I think we all recognize the value and importance of honey. I mean, I didn't realize till a few years ago how honey is used to even heal wounds and keep wounds in your body from infection, especially deep wounds. That surprised me. But I think we need to find a balance somewhere in how we can allow the smaller operators to be able to operate without an overwhelming list of regulations, but yet also ensure the safety of the community. There are times in the past, I mean, we've seen this. I know Mr. Westick, who's been farming for many years and has quite a significant operation at his farm in Dedido. While he himself, fortunately, because he's a responsible farmer, has not gone through this. We've seen with regards to fresh fruits and vegetables that really affected the industry a number of years ago, just because the farmer I don't know if public health ultimately even found out who was responsible But, just the improper application of pesticides that made the produce that was provided unsafe. And I know for a number of years, including myself, did not buy local produce because of that. And because of the limitations of resources to be able to go out and inspect a lot of these farms to make sure that people are doing safe practices. I mean, it's wonderful. We're getting more, organic is not such a foreign word as it used to be back in the day. And people are getting more conscientious of their overall health and well-being. And certainly we want to have more producers and encourage it. We don't want it to be so insurmountable that it's not worth the time and effort. But at the same time, we need to find a happy medium on where we can allow smaller producers to do what they need to do, but yet also ensure the safety of the community. Because I'll tell you, one incident is all you need. One circumstance where someone gets very sick because of something that was not properly prepared, and then we have a problem. And then the whole industry, the small industry that's been working all these years to develop, can be so adversely affected. We've seen it happen, and we hope it doesn't happen again. But the reality is it has happened, and it does affect the public's view and buying habits as a result of it. So I think we want to avoid that. So I'm hoping that before this bill comes before us, I know we love to rush to get bills out there and get them on the floor of the legislature, in lightning speed. But sometimes we're not doing our community a lot of good if we don't actually work through these issues. So I would like to see, Madam Chair, perhaps we can have input again from public health, but also the key representatives of the private industry here and Department of Agriculture, if there are other recommendations that can be made to this bill, because we're just passing it, we're allowing certain things to happen without regulation. But I think we need to determine, is it, are you a producer up to this amount, for example, that if you do less than a certain amount, you're unregulated, over a certain volume, you're regulated. But I think safety and, sanitary conditions of how this is being done is important, because in most cases you are taking a natural product, you are putting it in a jar or something else, whatever might be the case, and it's touched by human hands. We'd like to think everyone is responsible. Not everyone is responsible. That's the reality. But certainly maybe in the small organization of beekeepers, you guys all know each other. So it makes it more, upfront in knowing how each other and who each other is and how the practices are. But we're still not at a state overall with agriculture on Guam where we have that direct sense of knowledge. I mean, you have produce that's being, purchased and then resold in the community. It's not necessarily the farmer themselves, even though I know Mr. Westick will go out and not only does he plant his corn from the seed, grows it, harvests it, and then he goes out directly and sells it to the community. So, when you buy corn from Mr. Westick, you know where it came from. That's not the case with all things. I know that's a bigger, broader issue of agriculture on Guam. It's certainly an industry we want to see grow. It definitely has the ability and potential to grow. But with regards to this particular bill, I'd like to see if there's something more that can be put in place in the language to move forward with some standard of regulation so that our community has some sense of comfort that when they buy, honey, that it's safe. I think we all know the benefits of it, especially if it's grown and harvested right here on Guam, the tremendous pluses. But I think we need to find some medium here, because I'm also concerned about the issues that public health raised. And it may seem like a minor issue, but like I said, all it takes is one incident. If someone gets sick, and then we have a problem on our hands. So I don't want to trip over ourselves in wanting to get this in place without addressing what I see are some legitimate concerns that have been raised by public health. So I could ask just one question, Mr. Nadeau. What is the key thing you would like to see maybe added to this bill before it actually, if it were to be entertained and passed before the legislature? What key component do you think needs to be put in place? And do you think as a result of it, it should trigger, standard regulations that the, public health and agriculture, and certainly more importantly, members of our community that generate honey can participate in, so that there's some buy-in and it's something workable for the community?
Right. Well, the section, the relevant section that's being addressed for amendment in Bill 193. That alone, we have no concern. We like to retain as written, except maybe remove egg, but that's a whole different matter. But sticking to honey alone, as we mentioned, the way it's written, if it's unprocessed, then we have no concern with the proposal as written, because that's how it's written, and that is our interpretation as written as is. But if the plan now is to allow processing of honey without any regulatory oversight, and of course we have concern. And maybe if there's anything that maybe can come out of this is that allow public health, work with the association or whoever's interested, we'll come up with a regulations. But I really believe I can meet everyone's wants and needs. And because I've seen the operation, and once again, I acknowledge and thank Paul for giving us opportunity to watch the operation. And it's very simple, but yet I do know that not everyone has the capacity that he may have or he has to produce honey. So there's always a concern about the process, the handling of honey. There's the physical contaminants that can occur. So I prefer that this not be addressed at all through the current proposal, and simply allow us to work with the association and to come up with regulations through the normal process, or if you wish to expedite it, the legislation will take it straight as a bill, however they wish to address it. But I think it's going to start with just simply allow us to work with them to create a proposal.
I wanted to ask Mr. Nadeau, and also for the listening audience, what is the bridge over here between natural production and when you're actually refining it into something else, you're producing something else with the honey or processing it? What is the line between natural honey that you're saying perhaps doesn't require any further attention versus processing of honey for the rest of us that don't? We're just used to getting honey in a jar. How it gets there, I never really thought about it. It's just, it's there and you enjoy your honey. You could put it in your tea and in your food and whatever the case may be. But can you just let us know what the fine line is between the natural production and the processing of honey?
Right. So honey itself is natural. If you look at the current language of the relevant section in question, the word is unprocessed fruits and vegetables. So that's why someone like Mr. Westick could sell his corn on the side of the road without any regulatory oversight. We're fine with that. There's no actual processing, meaning there's no further cutting, there's no chopping, there's no scraping, where there's involvement of handling of the product, which may possibly introduce contaminants, whether it be physical, chemical, biological, or that doesn't require, or eventually requires further processing, like cooking at the house. So how we differentiate processing is if it's sold as is, I guess that's the best way I can say it, then we will not be involved in it because it's not being processed, like harvesting corn and selling it straight to the market. Now for honey, and Paul can chime in on this because he's the expert in this. I'm not going to try to pretend I am. So for us, if we literally take the term processing, you have to take the entire hive and sell it. When it's not being processed, you just simply pick it up and sell it. But you don't do that. Normally you wouldn't do that, I don't think. You would have to either cut it or drain it, scrape it, and package it somehow. But because that's the way it's being sold at this time, it would be deemed processing and thus require regulatory oversight. But, not that it would happen, but if Paul wants to sell honey straight from the box to the consumer, then I guess we would consider that processing because he's not touching it any further than what the bee has already done. There's no processing involved. It's just simply the product as is, as produced. If that makes sense. I hope that answered the question, Senator. Maybe if I wasn't very clear, but
yeah, aside again, I always see it even locally. It's just already sold. It's already most cases it's in a jar. It's in a sealed jar. So I don't know. Is honey sold in its natural state here? Maybe Paul Packbeer, maybe you can elaborate. I just want to get clarification, I'm sure, for the listening public, because, where's the fine line between it being a natural product and when it gets processed? Because then, as Mr. Nadeau said, when it becomes processed, that's when, he believes regulations need to be put in place.
Sure.
Can we just get further
Senator,
clarification, maybe, Paul, on that?
Yes. And I'll try to keep it short because I get very long-winded when I talk about bees and honey. Okay. Bees make honey from collecting nectar, which is sugar water, and they have enzymes in their honey stomachs that starts converting the sugars in it. They put it in the comb, like you see behind me here, and they'll evaporate water from that product. If the water content is below 18%, the bees decide that it's honey, it's done. And they'll put a little wax capping on it. And these are actually behind me are drone caps. There's this larvae underneath it, but kind of similar. So now you have a honeycomb with wax capping on it, and you can harvest that. And that would be, as Tom probably would define, as non-processed. Now, of course, we don't want to eat the comb as such. So to get it in your bottle, now you could take some of the comb, take a piece of it, and some people like to actually eat it, and they have like wax in their mouths. You eat it with crackers. It's not so bad, but the most prominent way that honey is consumed is somehow to get the honey out of the comb. So what a beekeeper will do, they'll either take the entire comb and crush it, and will squeeze the honey out of it and then collect it. Typically, because you have pieces of wax in there, they'll run it through a kind of a sieve, not a filter, but kind of a, just to get the big particles out. That's it. Other beekeepers, myself included, will cut the combs off. We'll spin the frames. The honey comes out, then it drains through the sieve, and then it goes into the bottle. So that's it. One thing that you mentioned earlier, you don't know the beekeeper, do they wash their hands? You don't know how sanitary they are. I can assure you that if you get honey on your hands, that honey will never make it back into the bottle. That will stay on your hands until you actually wash your hands. It's very sticky. And while it's touching your hands, it's sanitizing your hands also. So the whole processing is really very minimal. And as a beekeeper, as a natural food, the whole processing has a bad feeling to it, because that typically means there's somebody in China that's processing honey, ultrafiltration, taking out the pollen so that we cannot know where the origins of it is. But we really like raw honey. We sell as raw honey, meaning if you look in the bottle, you may see pieces of wax still floating in it because we do not process it. It's literally from the hive to the bottle with very minimal interaction. Whatever the interactions are, the honey itself is incredibly sticky. You need to have a clean operation, or you're going to be infested with ants, especially here on Guam, or other things. So it's really a self-regulating industry because of that. And I know Tom and I had a back and forth on that. It's very, very, very low risk, because if you're not working clean, for one, your spouse probably going to kick you out of the house because everything is going to be sticky with honey. Every door handle you grab. So I hope that explains it a little bit.
No, I certainly appreciate it. Like I said, I think we certainly want to encourage the industry, but I just want to make sure that, it's not an issue of concern just with regards to health and safety. I'm sure that those our local producers, such as yourself here, want to ensure that as well. But it's just giving the public a comfort level, because things have happened, probably will happen again in the future, and especially when it comes to consumption of things that we eat. We just want to make sure they're safely produced and safe for our people to consume. So with that, thank you, Mr. Packbeer, for your giving us some insight into that. And certainly, Madam Chair, appreciate the opportunity to ask questions and comment with regards to this bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Director Chelsea, you had your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to kind of add on to what Paul was explaining with processing, and maybe that's what we need to reconsider here. If we're going to make changes to this bill, is either how we're interpreting processing or how we define it, because even in other agricultural commodities, we count them as unprocessed, or we consider them as unprocessed when they're harvested and then sold to the community. But in the same sense that honey is extracted from the hives and put into a jar, our local produce is processed to some extent when we sell it, even on the roadside markets. When I harvest eggs, I have to wash them before I sell them to Paul or to Guam Sustainable or to Farm to Table. When someone is harvesting kangkong or tomatoes, there's some level of processing when they wash it and then put it in a bag. So maybe it's just readjusting how we interpret the word process, because I've actually participated in harvesting honey, and it's challenging. It is messy, but you can also see that when it's removed from the comb and put into either a sieve or a sleeve, the large parts are extracted or removed from it, and then the liquid comes out and is put into a jar. And that, in our consideration, is minimal level of processing. It's removed from the hive and put into a jar. It's equivalent to harvesting the eggs from a chicken, washing it off, when sometimes there is actual fecal matter on it, refrigerating it, and then selling it to a consumer. I would consider those both minimal levels of processing. And so maybe it's just how we look at it.
All right, thank you, Director Brack. Christopher Rosario, you had your hand raised. So if you have any comments.
Yeah, so just one additional thing for Tom. There are a lot of honey regulations in the mainland U.S. and partially because of one big factor, and Paul mentioned this. There are currently right now a global epidemic of varroa mites, and what makes Guam what makes us really lucky is that we don't have varroa mites. But the reason why there are a lot of honey regulations worldwide is because beekeepers will use certain not insecticides to say, but it's more so miticides to kill the mites that are currently existing in bee colonies. Now on Guam, we don't have varroa mites. We haven't seen varroa mites for several years, and none of us beekeepers have the pesticides to actually kill the mites. So and in some cases, you'll apply pesticides that will kind of ruin the honey. So or even just the mere fact that you're using a pesticide to kill current parasites that are in colonies. But this is why there have been regulations to that. And so again, on Guam, we basically don't have the parasites in our colonies, and therefore we're not using any insecticide or any pesticides in our bee colonies. So that's a huge thing, especially for Guam, because we don't have the mite. And then of course to go back into the processing of honey, I mean, cutting grapes off of a branch or something and putting it in a bag would be I would feel that would be the same way as cutting a piece of comb and putting them in a container. That essentially is kind of the same, I would think, is the same thing in that case. But yeah, that's all I want to add.
All right, thank you for that point. Chief Nadeau, you had your hand raised.
Yes, thank you, Senator. Once again, we have no true issue with the product itself, honey. When you say processing, when you put it in a jar, you assume the jar has been cleaned, at least sanitized, right? There's no glass particles, dirt, or other debris in it, right? When you put it in a bag, you hope that the bag was properly stored, was not kept out in the yard or out where it could be exposed to contaminants. That's part of processing. So as I mentioned, we're okay with the product. It's the processing, in other words, the handling of the item that's a concern. And that goes with people. I mean, people are the ones going to cause contamination. So we want to regulate the individuals and thus the operation in ensuring that the honey that's sold are perfectly safe. You don't have to worry about glass particles. You don't have to worry about metal strain product or whatever process they happen to use in the process. So once again, I really believe a simple regulations just on honey can be developed, as Senator Brown has mentioned. I think it's doable. It's just now a matter of committing to it, and you have our commitment to make that possible.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nadeau. Yeah, I think I think there is it seems to me like there is a potential dialogue that can happen after this to come up with to regulations, I think. All right, so next person, I'd like to recognize Senator Amanda Shelton. If she has any comments or questions at this time.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I want to thank all of the folks who came on today to provide testimony from the Beekeepers Association, from the Farmers, Agriculture, Public Health. Thank you very much for all of the comments. I was able to speak with the Beekeepers Association last weekend at the Migratory Birds event from UOG, hosted by UOG at Jeff's Pirates Cove. And so they had all of their gear set up and displayed their honeycombs and their honey. And I was quite impressed. I didn't realize that there was even this association that existed on Guam, and that they were building up this new industry for us and potentially for our future visitors to once again enjoy their honey. And so I'm excited about this bill, and I want to thank Senator Clint Rigel for introducing this to help us get out of the gate and to legitimize the honey business, to legitimize this new industry that is up and coming, and definitely to recognize that there is a bit of risk that exists. But I think that there are ways for us to collaborate and to work together that to ensure the health and safety of everyone. And we have all the right players who are here, but I hope that this bill itself does not get bogged down with any rules and regulations in this particular bill, but that we can work on that in a separate way, so that our beekeepers can continue to do what they're doing, and to have the support from us here in the government to allow them to do this good business. And so I thank you very much for the time and for all of the comments. I've never learned so much about bees and honey, and I'm very excited about all of it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Shelton. Senator Chris Duenas, if you have any questions or comments at this time.
Madam Chair, I don't have any questions. The back and forth really has kind of laid out a lot of the issues being put forward here. I too, think that I know the author will move this bill with all the recommendations that have been put forward here. I just wanted to thank, the beekeepers, and this. I know this is a high value industry. I've watched on during some downtime. I've watched Netflix in terms of some of the exploitation of this product, and so this is a high value product on Guam, as these beekeepers have been putting forward. I know that also, I believe Senator Lim Tiaco several years ago introduced legislation to try to get some marketing capabilities with Gita and others on this product because of the high value that it has, coming from a very pristine area like Guam, free of the mites and other things that has been discussed here today. So I think it's a valuable discussion, and I look forward to watching the bill through its progression. And once again, Paul and Chris and the rest of the individuals here, thank you for doing what you do, and the association as well, because this really for the tourism industry and other opportunities as we start to restart Guam again. This is something that I think is very unique, and something that brings a lot of opportunity. And I think Tom will work closely with us to see how we can, move this forward, and also, see to it that we have that safety factor as well in place. So thanks for all you do, and I'll continue to listen and monitor the progress. Madam Chair.
Senator Duenas. Senator Mary Torres, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to first of all thank all of you for coming to this public hearing and for providing very valuable testimony. Thalia, Paul, Christopher, and Olympia, you certainly enlightened us about the nature of beekeeping and honey production on Guam. And I think what's important also is we're talking about the development of a cottage industry and the importance of enabling it to not only develop and continue to flourish, but also what's foremost in most of our concerns, as I'm sure with the author of this legislation, is to remove those barriers that prohibit and discourage people from developing these cottage industries. And I think we're at that point in our development in Guam where we've seen our vulnerabilities and how we as a people really need to take matters into our own hands and develop our own industries, particularly at the cottage industry level. And so I stand committed to support this legislation. If there are reasonable concerns and amendments that can be woven in, those certainly can be taken into account. But foremost, we must enable industries like the beekeeping and the honey production, farm to table, all the organizations that allow these to happen and support the people to come into this realm. We need to work further to help all of you. So I thank you for this very wonderful public hearing. I think I've learned so much, but mostly for your efforts to grow the cottage industries, because you are, after all, the going to be the next backbone of what's going to sustain Guam going into the future. So, Sus Masi, thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you, Senator Torres. Okay, are there any other testimonies from the anybody here today, that anybody that would like to give testimony before we close? Ernie?
Madam Chair, I see Olympia Terrell has her hand raised. I'm not sure if she still has something to say.
Yes, I recognized Ernie, so we'll follow up with Olympia. So Ernie, you're recognized.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate to make sure that in this bill, it does not overregulate to discourage the producers. Do not overregulate to discourage the producers. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Westick. Ms. Terrell, if you have any further testimony, supplemental testimony.
I have a question for Director Chelsea. I put in the chat something I just found online, and it was, the question was, do I need a license to sell honey in Florida? And the Department of Agriculture in Florida said that no, that they added honey to the list of cottage foods. And I'm wondering, is there a list of cottage foods on Guam, a list of foods that don't? So by adding it to the list of cottage foods, those who have no more than $15,000 a year in sales can now bottle and sell honey without getting permits and preparing it in a Department of Agriculture inspected kitchen. So that is from Florida. And so, my question is are there, and also to Department of Public Health, are there cottage foods that don't need to be inspected, or that can be made in a kitchen that's not inspected by Public Health?
Well, to answer your question, Olympia, there's a definition for cottage industry in the Guam Code Annotated. I can't remember who introduced the bill at the time. I think I don't want to try to guess or remember, but cottage industry was defined as like home-based businesses. But as you recall, because you're also a part of it, is that we've added apiarists to the bona fide certificate qualifications under the Department of Agriculture. And I was wanting to mention that, so thank you for bringing it up, is that the local apiarists and members of the Beekeepers Association also apply to be certified bona fide farmers with the Department of Agriculture. We go out and do an inspection of their facility to ensure that they're raising bees and in not humane, but the bees are kept in conditions that are good for their well-being. Additionally, I believe, if you're going to be a bona fide farmer, you can indicate whether you're engaging in commercial sales or if you're doing it for subsistence. So we do differentiate between the two. And those that are engaged in commercial sales, we encourage them to register with the Department of Revenue and Taxation, not necessarily to get a business license, but just so that they can participate in the exemptions that are afforded to bona fide farmers. But we can work with public health to define cottage foods, although I would hesitate to do that because then we're creating a narrow list where really we've seen, I mean, if anyone's seen the pig bricks that are going around in everybody's WhatsApp, the ingenuity on our island is, it's immeasurable at times. And if we create a list of cottage foods, then we're putting people in a box, and I don't like doing that. And when we've talked with Paul about regulations, we prefer to, yes, work with the Beekeeper Association, but so that they develop internal regulations rather than statutory regulations, because they're already doing it themselves and ensuring that all their members are adequately trained. So I hope that we kind of move more towards just working with the industry and creating self-regulating processes rather than creating statutes that then to some extent tend to become hindrances to small businesses.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so I would like to now recognize the sponsor of the bill for closing or any questions and comments.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, I did have a question for Mr. Nadeau. I know it was kind of brought up before, but I guess the main question for me is, what's the line between processing and not what's the definition of processing? What is the definition of processing as you understand it?
Right. So whenever that you change the product in a manner, whether it's through size, whether it's composition, whether it's a final product, we deem that to be processing. I know it's a very broad term, but it's essentially whenever you convert something to a different product, whether it's through cutting, cooking, scraping, if you will, then it's no longer in its I don't know, its original state, I guess would be the best way to say that. I don't want to say natural, but original state.
See, that's where it's kind of confusing and complicated, because technically even any produce that's sold is not really in its 100% natural state. It's cut from something, like if you got bananas, you cut the bananas off the branch. Different products, I'm sure they take certain leaves off of it if there's extra leaf growths around whatever the vegetable or fruit is. They kind of clean it up a little bit, and then they also bag it, when they sell it to you. So to me, bagging it is kind of the same thing as putting honey in a jar. So human hands are still touching the produce, and what we're looking to do is just include honey along with that type of minimal, if that's the term you want to use for processing, is technically the way I see it, even vegetables or fruits, if that's the definition, if the definition is that you touched it and you did something to it, then that sounds like processing to me. Even if you're picking mangoes off a tree and then taking all the leaves off the mango and then putting out, that's processing. And dusting off the ants on the mango, is that processing?
Well, Senator, I think this is a great reason why we should create regulation to address something to that effect, so we can define it, and this so there won't be any confusion. And I still believe to this point that this is a very possible a regulation that's very possible and can benefit everyone, including public health and the beekeepers. I really do.
And then just also, I know that that an issue of botulism was brought up, and I know that you said that's not your main concern, but it was brought up in your testimony. And just for the listening public at home, so they understand what botulism is. Botulism, stick your hand in the dirt and there's botulism. You know what I mean? Botulism is found in soil. So next time you're digging in the dirt, go call public health to inspect the dirt and make sure there's no botulism in it. So I just want to be clear that botulism is something that's found, everywhere. It's just pretty much in the environment. So even vegetables that are dug out of the dirt, for example, dogu, like Bonellus dogu, and any sort of tuber or something that's in the dirt can, in theory, have botulism. So I just want that to be clear, that it's something that's very ubiquitous, and but it is also very rare that people get sick from it. And usually they say for infants to stay away from any honey, including the so-called regulated honey that we import from the States. I know because we have a 1-year-old baby, and when we were going to the doctor, it's the first time I ever heard it, the doctor was like, no honey. And I said, why? And they said, oh, that might have botulism in it. So, and this is including inspected honey, so-called regulated honey from wherever we're importing it from. So I just wanted to make some of those points clear. Also, I did want to bring up some points about imported honey. In fact, there's some really good documentaries you can see on Netflix. I'm sure you can find some reports online about it as well. But a major problem in the US is imported honey from foreign countries, particularly China and some bad actors in the country of China. I'm talking mainland China, where they're actually selling corn syrup. It's not even honey. And they're having a huge problem with identifying what's real honey and what's not. There's so much that's being imported. The United States public health system is not even able, and their other regulatory systems aren't even able to keep up with the amount of honey that's being imported to be able to test the batches and know that it's actual honey and know what's in it. So it's a huge problem in the US mainland right now. And in fact, that's why a lot of states, I think, are encouraging the local producers. And I think that's why we're seeing states begin to remove regulations on some of the local small producers of honey. For example, Florida and Oregon were examples brought up today, is because of this issue of imported honey that's, you think it's regulated because it's, because the government's supposed to be regulating it, but there's just so much coming in, they're not able to test all the batches properly. And as was mentioned, because they're heavily strained, there's no pollen in them, so they're not even able to determine whether there's pollen in it. Basically, they've had to resort to complicated tests that are extremely expensive to do, and that they can only spot check on certain batches of honey to determine if it really is even honey. I see Mr. Packbeer put a comment in our chat that says, you don't know if it's real honey unless you know the beekeeper. And I love that statement. That's true. And here on Guam, because we're so small, we know the beekeepers. They're right here. We've got Mr. Rosario, we've got Mr. Packbeer, and other beekeepers here as well. So I think that's a good thing when you're able to have small beekeepers that we know. And that's the whole idea of the farm to table movement, is knowing your farmers, knowing where you're getting your products from, so that there's that level of trust. If something's wrong with the honey that you bought, you know where to find Paul. He's in Tiedzin. You can find him. You go to his office and say, hey, Paul, what's this? What'd you put in my honey? The same thing with Chris Rosario. You know where to find him. These are people we know, as opposed to this imported honey that we have no idea of the processes that are happening to that honey. We have no idea what's in that honey. And in fact, increasingly, we don't even know if it even is honey or if it's just sweetened corn syrup. And who knows what else is in it. So for me, this is the safest way to go, is to go with local farmers and local produce where we know where our food is coming from. And that's how we keep them accountable. That's the best way to keep them accountable, is to buy local. We have no idea where off-island stuff is coming from and what goes into it. These are being done in foreign countries that we have no oversight or regulation over, yet we import them here. And we put them on our shelves without any questions. And I know that's more of a testament to the overall system. I know that's not necessarily any fault of Guam's Department of Public Health is doing what they're required to do. I know public health's not necessarily required to inspect honey that's imported other than to ensure that it's properly closed, but you're not inspecting it from where we're getting it from. And that's up to the regulators in the States or wherever else we're really importing these products from. So that's where I do see value in this idea of allowing small local beekeepers the ability to be able to sell their honey here on Guam with minimal, very minimal regulation or oversight, especially if it's unprocessed. I see, Mr. Nadeau, you do have your hand raised.
Oh yes, I was just kind of respond, if I'm able to respond to a couple of comments. Sure. In terms of to ensure that the local honey that's being sold are truly local, one way to be addressed is labeling. And that can be done through development regulations. And we can incorporate that, that we've done in other products as well. So I think that's another reason why it'd be helpful for the industry if we require labeling to ensure these are local honey as opposed to imported honey. So that's another way you can adjust the regulations. Just want to comment on that as well. And that's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Nadeau. Yes, and I understand where the Department of Public Health is coming from. It is your job as a regulatory agency to ensure that you're regulating certain things. And I appreciate your comments and your testimony today. So please don't take anything I'm saying as any sort of negativity towards your agency or towards your hard work, Mr. Nadeau. I know you guys do a lot of hard work and you have a huge area to oversee. So we're just trying to lessen the area you have to oversee. I'm just kidding. So, with that, I do hope to work with the beekeepers, and I would like to talk to you, Mr. Nadeau, offline outside of this, and maybe figure out if there's a happy medium that we can find between what we want to accomplish with promoting local agriculture and local beekeeping, and with your job you have as a regulatory agency. Again, I do want to thank everyone for coming out today and thank the Beekeepers Association of Guam and everyone else who's provided testimony today. I do intend to do some more work on this measure and see what we can come up with. But ultimately, I would like to see the least amount of regulation involved when it comes to producing local honey, especially in light of all the antimicrobial, antibacterial properties of honey. And the fact that in its nature, honey is essentially a very safe product, as Mr. Packbeer and others have stated. This is a product that doesn't even have a shelf life. I mean, this is a product that truly keeps. You can stick this on the shelf forever. I've got some old honey in my cupboards because I'm not in a hurry to use it all, because I know it's gonna last. I'm not worried about it going bad at all. And so I think we can find some common ground on this particular issue, and I look forward to working with everyone on this measure to find something that can truly help our beekeepers of Guam continue to grow their numbers and continue to produce more and more local honey for Guam, so we can replace all that imported honey that we have no idea what's in it, or if it's even honey or not, with fresh local honey. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you, Senator Rogel. There being no additional individuals to present further testimony, this committee will now consider Bill 193-36 COR duly heard. We will now move on to the next item on the agenda, Bill number 195-36 COR, also introduced by Senator Rogel. So Bill 195-36 COR, sponsored by Senator Rogel, an act to amend Section 35102 of Chapter 35, Division 2, Title 10 Guam Code annotated relative to permitting raising poultry or fowl, aquaculture systems, and aquaponic systems in residential areas. Before we hear from those who signed up today to provide testimony on the bill, I would like to now invite the sponsor of the bill, Senator Clinton Rogel, to introduce the bill. Senator Rogel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. More and more food security has become a great concern for the people of Guam. Reports are showing increased dependence on programs, the SNAP, with food scarcity becoming more and more of a problem across the island. Moreover, over the past couple of years, the global pandemic has brought to the forefront and shown our island's residents' ability to provide for themselves and their families with the supply chain and food shortages that are currently affecting us. Essentially, the global pandemic has shown our island's vulnerability to the global food supply chain and to global food shortages. Promoting home cultivation of poultry and poultry products, as well as aquaculture and aquaponic systems for residents who do not currently occupy agricultural lands, will provide greater access to food security, reducing our dependence on imported food sources and their ever-increasing costs, as well as dependence on public assistance. Bill number 195-36 COR aims to allow people in residential areas the ability to raise and keep poultry and fowl, as well as allowing them to use aquaculture and aquaponic systems to provide for personal consumption or even start a business to contribute to our island's economy. I ask my colleagues to support this measure in assisting Guam's residents by promoting home agriculture to help combat food insecurity. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Senator Rogel. We had Dr. John Jensen from Weary signed up today, but I think he has something conflicting in his schedule. But he did provide a testimony to the committee, and yeah, we will include that in the Google Drive for everybody to see. For now, we'd like to invite Director Chelsea Munya-Brack to provide testimony.
Thank you again, Madam Chair and the committee for the opportunity to provide testimony on Bill number 195-36. Bill number 195-36 enables the department to grant anyone in a residential zone the ability to raise poultry or fowl and or cultivate aqua produce on their property. This advancement will promote food security with easy accessibility to eggs, poultry, and fish. As we continue to navigate through these difficult times of a pandemic and the strain placed on our supply chain, food security is in question. Bill number 195-36 allows residents to produce their own food with low maintenance efforts, whether it's raising poultry or fowl and or fish. As part of that low maintenance, the department will review waste management plans, which is important when in residential areas. These plans will ensure waste is properly disposed of and not left for surrounding neighbors to endure or damage to our waterlands. This law will allow our community to take itself off the reliance of certain types of imported goods and provide for itself while securing a fortified future. The Department of Agriculture supports Bill number 195-36. As we look towards building a more sustainable and food secure economy, we must encourage more agricultural industry, which includes our communities becoming more self-sufficient. I think I'd also like to add on that through our agency and many of us just knowing individuals, there are already people who are not as aware of this law as it exists currently and are raising chickens in residential areas. We hope that through this bill, when it becomes law, or should it become law, that we're able to then work with these individuals to create systems that allow them to keep their chickens that they're raising for their family, but to do it in a much sounder way using practices that'll conserve and preserve our natural resources. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Director Breck. So now I'd like to recognize Tom Nadeau from Department of Public Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hafaday, Madam Chair, Senator Clinton Ruggiero, and members of the Committee on Health, Land, Justice, and Culture. My name is Tom Nadeau. I am the Chief Environmental Public Health Officer with the Division of Environmental Health of the Department of Public Health and Social Services. On behalf of Mr. Arthur U. San Agustin, the Director of Public Health and Social Services, we thank you for granting us the opportunity to provide our testimony on Bill 195-36, an act to amend Section 35102 of Chapter 35, Division 2, Title 10, GCA, relative to permitting the raising of poultry or fowl in establishment of aquaculture systems and aquaponic systems in residential areas. I also have with me Mr. Jerome Garcia. He is the acting supervisor for the Bureau of Inspection Enforcement, and he's available to provide any questions that might have after my presentation. Thank you. The Division of Environmental Health, also known as DEH, is one of the 6 divisions of the Department of Public Health and Social Services. It is the mission of DEH to protect the people of Guam from environmental hazards through education and the implementation of its governing laws, which are Title 10 GCA chapters 20 to 33 and 35 to 40, and its applicable rules and regulations. These mandates control both human and animal activities in preventing harm to the public. As a result, the department cannot support Bill 195-36 as the proposal will further promote public nuisances from occurring in residential neighborhoods. Section 20109 of Title 10 GCA Chapter 20 authorizes DEH to conduct inspections of all public and private premises to enforce its mandates, which include public nuisances. This chapter defines public nuisance as anything that is determined by the director to be dangerous to life, injurious to health, or renders soil, air, water, or food impure or unwholesome. It has also been defined as a condition that interferes with the public right to pursue the normal conduct of life without threat to health, comfort, and restfulness. Thus, the violation of any environmental health laws of Title 10 GCA is a public nuisance, including the provisions of Chapter 35, identifies livestock and poultry. Public complaints or public nuisance complaints that DH regularly receives can be broadly divided into 2 categories. 1, complaints against health-regulated establishments, such as food establishments, institutional facilities, cosmetic establishments, and other businesses requiring a sanitary permit. The other category is the village sanitation complaints, which involve nuisances on private premises and businesses that are not generally regulated by DEH. About 1/3 of all the grievances we receive are village sanitation complaints. Approximately 20% of them involve raising of chickens on residential or commercial property. One of the reasons Chapter 35 has a provision requiring 50-foot distancing of chickens from the nearest building is to protect the health and welfare of individuals who may be occupying these structures from an unhealthy environment that can be created from the presence of up to 20 chickens, which are permitted on residential properties at this time. Threats to human health from chickens include infectious agents that can cause a variety of diseases such as bird flu, salmonellosis, and E. coli infection. Pests can also become a problem as the continuous production of feces by these birds can lead to the proliferation of flies and rodents that feed on the bits of food found inside their excrement and among scattered poultry feed. There's also a concern of allergic reactions and asthma attacks provoked from the dust and dirt that the fowl constantly kicks up. Even the excessive noise from their crowing, which are some of the complaints DEH have received about chickens, can adversely impact human health as it can interfere with the public's right for comfort and restfulness. Sleep disturbances, hypertension, impairment, and child development are Health hazards associated with noise pollution caused by the crowing of roosters. Like most threats, the environmental health concerns mentioned above can be reduced if the danger is placed away from the people in their dwellings, which the existing provision requires in Chapter 35 that Bill 195-36 is attempting to remove. We must also remember that the protection of health sought in Chapter 35 is not limited to only the property owners or others who may be on his or her property, but it's also to protect their neighbors who may be exposed to a threat, which can be compounded if the 55 provision is removed from Section 35102B. Another reason, another reason public health opposes Bill 195-36 is that it seeks to insert a provision on aquaculture and aquaponic systems in a chapter reserved and dedicated for the control of livestock and poultry, as the title indicates, which is enforced by DEH. Instead, Bill 195-36 appears to be addressing land zone matters and environmental concerns, which should be tackled elsewhere with the participation of the relevant regulatory agencies, such as Department of Land Management and the Guam Environmental Protection Agency. We are not an expert on aquaculture or aquaponics, but we are aware of the potential environmental health impacts of failed or mismanaged aquaculture and aquaponic projects, which include the creation of mosquito breeding grounds and the discharge of wastewater into the environment. It is our understanding that both aquaculture and aquaponic systems require significant startup costs and effort, and the return on investment may be minimal if not properly operated. Consequently, we may end up seeing abandoned aquaculture or aquaponic projects started by well-intended but inexperienced citizens, and instead of growing fish or plants, they may end up breeding mosquito that can transmit diseases such as dengue fever. Although well-intended, public health simply cannot support Bill 195 as its passage will threaten the health and welfare of the community, and it seeks to incorporate provisions that should be discussed further and in greater details with other stakeholders in a different forum. Thank you once again for giving us the opportunity to present this testimony. Sizus Maasi.
Thank you, Mr. Nadeau, for that testimony. We do have Jerome Garcia. Again, are you going to testify or just are you here to answer questions?
I'm just here to answer questions. Thank you.
All right, so the next person that we have signed up is Guam Water Works Authority, General Manager Miguel Bordalio, but I see Vanji Lujan is here. Okay, so Vanji, you're recognized to provide testimony.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm Vanji Lujan. I'm the Senior Regulatory Analyst for Guam Waterworks, and I'm providing our testimony on behalf of Miguel Bordalio, the General Manager. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comments on Bill 195-36. GWA understands the intent of the bill and encourages activities to address food security and encourage small businesses. The proposed activities would have adverse impacts to the public water and wastewater systems, and therefore GWA would like to see amendments to the bill that will ensure the safety of Guam's drinking water and help us to ensure compliance with existing federal and local regulations. GWA's primary responsibility and concern is to operate and maintain water and wastewater systems in compliance with applicable regulations for the protection of all of Guam's residents. The regulatory regimen includes things that provide services and provisions under the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Guam Primary Drinking Water Regulations, and the Clean Water Act. To protect Guam's public water system from possible contamination, GWA has implemented a cross-connection control and backflow prevention program. A backflow is unwanted or undesirable reverse flow of contaminants or pollutants into the drinking water systems. GWA is requesting that the following be added to the bill. Residents who intend to install aquaculture or aquaponic systems must first obtain a permit and clearance from GWA for the installation of a backflow preventer for all their connections to GWA's water system. This backflow preventer must be properly sized and installed. The backflow preventer will be required to be inspected and tested to ensure proper operation, with the results submitted to GWA annually. So I'll just give you if you put a hose in a bucket and some of that water, there's a pressure in the line can seep backflow into GWA system. And so this is where this regulation is required. In addition, residents who intend to install aquaculture aquaponic systems and are connected to the public sewer system must also first obtain a pre-treatment permit from GWA before any discharge from such system is allowed into GWA's sewer system. The pre-treatment program was developed to reduce the introduction of harmful contaminants into the sewer system, which could impact GWA's existing wastewater treatment process. The additions of these changes to the bill will ensure the safety of Guam's drinking water and that pollutants entering into GWA's wastewater systems are properly managed and controlled. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comments to the bill. Please feel free to contact our general manager for any questions or comments on this testimony. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much, Ms. Lujan, for your testimony. So next we have on the list is Ernie Westick, Vice President, Guam Farmers Association.
Thank you, Senator Sabrina. You know, this bill is wrong. I mean, what's happening to us? Just because of the pandemic, now we're going to go ahead and permit to raise 20 chickens in an apartment. You know, that's why they got zoning, agriculture zoning, residential zoning, commercial zoning. So this trying to raise chicken in residential is a no-no. Since I was growing up, I've learned about this. You don't raise chicken in a residential because the chicken will, even if it's contained, it will smell. And how about your neighbor? So I disagree with this bill right now. I'm for agriculture, but this is going too far. This is really going too far. So all I'm going to say is that I disagree with this bill. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your testimony, Mr. Westick. We'd like to call on Ronald Laguatnia. You're recognized, Ron. Good morning.
Afare, todo samjo. Si Ronald Laguatnia zo from Labutsu Gadi Farms. Zana Berukanisa, todo samjo. And Senadora Sabina Perez, Senator Clint Rigel, Senator Tony Ada, Senator Terlaje, Senator Joanne Brown, Senator Mary Torres, Senator Chris Duenas, and Senadora Amanda Shelton. Dongkulo na sujus maasi ni manggayam jugini. Dene kungok. That's all looking about Reconisa, EGSC, Guahan Sustainable Culture. It's a guess, Michelle Chrysostom. Donkulo nagradecimento pereno na inenon. E não siya sumupopoti mandikiki na lancero. Za esti na bill ni maproponi para eto siya lekuna para ilinala ikustumbrin antes. Debi di tabire tati tatahasu ilanso tani pesca. Esta tisina ta depende gini nengkano gini lagu tani esti tourist. Turista siya ni para ta ninay sa lapi ekonomiya para ta fan mamantalo inata sa nafasya ni sita. Usuporti esti la priniponi 1-9-5-36 sa importante para ilinala tauto. Send dinansi si Senator Clint Rigel na hafay patapuni patasiga kumipendihit gi nengkanu San Lago ni Ombisuno esta tatazasta za ungano comprende si Ernie ni put poroma poksam bigi halam apartment esti man samoro dani tauto matungo tumamano iginasgas matungo como proprio mamoksay ki residensya bulat sumotsogi esta pago lo esti sa mananay chansa para itauto o fanlala. Kada da ilinala tempo, pago na tempo ilinala tauto. Sa patasiga matan esti siya i afa matsotsogi Amerika tagini na tabir tati di kultura. Sa edzgi importante ti para tasiga muna para pata hahasu tagini dan tagini lo para Guam at tungwa mismo prohimo umaday umatendi para ginasgas para manaserbi talo ang mangingi pa managasgas sa matsuli sa naserbi para abono. Masnya i abono man mamaki spray niti artificial siya na pesticides gi waterlands Ernie. Edzigi afano piligrunya no. Este organic itaki das nitrogen. Pes mausa papa gitinano. Haso kita gano na manera. Pues talo nanay pat idikikitaw to sansa para unagwaha nengkano mano para nanya zansada para familia. Jadi dia like bentia. You know, duda jo na para bataw to pafan pamoksay bentina mano. Gi alom apartment pa condominium. Duda jo. Lo baba kinasomo sa na senador si Clint habababahin na sonya para uhasu imantaw-taw ta. Taspia time manu sa atana loki ang patafan tafan ma-regulate talo para tafan lisensya permit. Sige babiket tungo haji para pinila na haji po inaatan talo na kung malangag na siya ni agriculture. Je apa siya para mamutan niya ay penalties talo pumapasi. Haji po inaatan na sa lapi. Rikoy na siguro giesti na lain nagbaha kung inaatan na so. Sa marikoy sa lapi sa mausa no para maatan ihapay haji mamamoksay. Lumunga madiroga gotpin sigidas. Agas mamamoksay manok tatatungo to mamano ginasgas. Man gasgas itaw ni para matungo sa para makano. Ada para mamoksay pero apata tatungo to mamano mamanesti za baulik sa imbababa matan mizu na tana sinyasti tatsagi. Mga niti gotper dumiroga. Umisuno estam mananalang itaw to manahana manesaki put para fan lala. Makat itempo babay tempo masnya pago man matsutsuli bineno. Zaatan man Terlaje stay itaw to disito na dayo gigama mo. Peligro dai famagon mo familia mo. Buzungo gano mapokay lumo. Peligro lo esti nanay chansa ibikikit na lansero. Jawa talo na babe aumenta iguahan sustainable culture. Sa eno na inet nun umajujuda iman dikikit na lansero. Man maajujuda ni mafafahan hafad dinididi binalonia pineksainia iman dikikit na lansero. Edzigi na bina 4 kilo mas 4 kilo iguahan sustainable culture. Sa man mafatugato di iman dikikit na lansero sa maajujuda mafafahan ibentan niya. Za mahanaw talo takti gi publiko. Lo taza na mamentino nisita yung gefatan ano. Ocho talo. Nisita maatan iman samoro na lansero. Sa i-co-op na lansero siya pura toto Chinese. Nisita yung atan ano. Tas si Telengna local farmers ano. Pura toto China. Zaman mana Sesabi Chamorro land trust na tono. Mas sublease ano. Hamzo baba matan nizo afa gwagwag ano. Didi dia ke local farmers get pura Chinese. Tipur hafa lo de man gwagwalo illegally. Debi Chamorro land trust o atan ano. Atan ni man taumo ni man bebendi. Son atan iman Chamorro na lansero ni man masasapit sa tisina mabendi gelay niya sa kalansia dan siya imanggesaga maatkila itano gato di Chinese pasi Chinese Gumalului pas mafafana talo. After neno, ni sita ma ba ni baba matanizu. Tapafadu tibe na be sanga ni minagahi. You know, after man lalansu iman tauta ni dankulu man produce nekuno. They're food producers. Zamanisita judu. Brian Leon Guerrero, dankulu jud na lancero na tau lo dosa tau nya. Dogana bea na mamakat na pupendi itsandia dan cucumber tau sa. Ma imasnya imanggesaga na business for mafan gatu di China itau Chinese ni Chinese umatikela itanonia subleasing land trust properties. Etigi siya on aatan regulated no siya. Lo esti dikiki pero esti sasata. Senator Clint Rizal. Talo nuwa gipito mano, Senator. You got it right on the button. Loco, itaha, untungo na perfecto, mami sena na honey from your local farmers, from your local producers. Na ino siya sa tsansa. Sa sti siya mandangklo na lansero, mandangklo, they are not locals. Those are not locals. Isang anyo. Isita maata nino. And look at your local producers. Sa timegay, estaman sa moro ni man der. Sotsugi idinansi. Man lalansugi land trust. Sa bahasa lupi, ti man lalansugi land trust. Manay 50 acres. Sa taza gwalo. Sita ma-monitor eno siya. Lo estinalay usupotisti. Nai chansa, nai jata patsitsui ne. Si Senator Clint Rizal, si Jus Maasi, na sa importante don nai chansa itau-tauta po fan produsi manuk para kaninia dan sada para nia. Ito pabesangan lo husupoti talo Guam sustainable culture. 2.5 Michelle, si Jus Maasi Michelle, una jujuda iman dikiki siya, the small farmers. Guam sustainable culture. Co-op, dangkulo na farmers and Chinese farmers. I'm sorry, ekwa dispensa lo angin patasangan pudestine ilansune. Bring it back to our culture. Fishing industry, the farming industry. Bring it back to sustainability of independence. The only way for independence is to be self-sustainable. Si dangkulo na si Jus Masi, dispensa na fan new tau lo husasangan ni minagay. I'm telling the truth. What's happening out there? Dangkulo na si Jus Masi, dana Dios hasta aquí.
Jesus Masi, Mr. Laguanya, for your testimony. Yeah, Ernie, yeah, you're recognized.
Bill, you know, I would like to speak in the vernacular also, okay? Put nila hafa na patatang sino pa ako. E di sangan ni 20 na manok yung apartment. Ichino ni manggawalo gitano ilan trust hunggan ti Debbie. They're not supposed to be farming on the land trust property. The Chinese are not supposed to farming on the land trust property. I agree with that. Lo ST put in inilala rin. Inilala. Hawk and Matanyago, you choose your destiny. Wala na tao to, di para matawagwa ofisyon niya sa tiningon niya. Hago run na matawagwa ofisyon mo. Run lagwa niya, matawag ofisyon mo. Wahod igumalo ofisyon ko, sabi na panyosyo, itatawagwa mo. At sige, na diferensya mentality. Idi kiki dan idangkulo. Hafa pa ako na patabira tati sa patasedi residential of mga agriculture, ni baha agriculture zone Ang malakaw gumalo sinawa man aplika. 5 acres, 2 acres, gilan trust, yung walo. You know, este na bill, you agree, I do not agree with this bill sa kila. Tisina na masedi. Na para tabira tati. Patabira ta tati gitu tonta. Manggas-gasit. Dahan na patabira ta tati. Patafan mama at patafan yola. Ha? Punto pun mama punto la. Kumagasa. Ni fa maguon sa man sindroga. Let us not go back to the uncivilized. We are civilized people. Let's be civilized. Let's not go back to the real olden days. If we want to go back to the real olden days, then let's get rid of everybody, including myself, because I'm a wood stick and you're Laguanya. Maybe you're not root tomorrow too. So let's just be civilized and do the right thing.
Okay, so we need to stick to the bill. But yeah,
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to testimony from Michelle Crisostomo from Guam Sustainable Culture.
Half a day, everyone, Madam Chair and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony on Bill 195. I am Michelle Crisostomo. I am president founder for Guam. I am also a scale farmer who integrates poultry farming. So at GSC, Guam support and advocate for a more sustainable island. Our primary focus is on food security and food sovereignty. We have worked with people of all ages in the community to promote the concept of sustainability while also encouraging entrepreneurship. And I just have to note that, you know, on any given day, someone in a residential area would have up to 20 plus wild chickens on their property. That's kind of how I remember growing up with the roosters crowing, waking me up every morning. They weren't mine. I lived in a residential area. It was just something that I remember growing up with. I don't, you know, if this is a public hazard, I don't see any regulatory agency doing anything about this, but I do know in Barrigada Heights, you know, in particular, there are wild chickens all over the neighborhood. I know some people catching them and raising them for eggs. So I don't know if they're doing their neighbors a favor or what. But since the start of COVID, our organization has helped over 100 people and their families start small scale poultry productions. Of course, we inform them of the existing regulations before they purchase chickens from us. But we have collaborated with organizations since Guam Economic Development Authority, the Department of Agriculture, and even hatcheries from off-island to host workshops and projects that inform and promote small-scale poultry farming on Guam. We also are partners with University of Guam's Aquaculture and Aquaponics Community Program, and recently received an aquaculture system at our site to be used as a demonstration system which could produce up to 200 pounds of fish every 5 to 6 months. And this will be used to teach others how to raise fish in their own backyards in a sustainable way to help increase their food security, generate supplemental income, and inspire them to possibly go commercial with it. We have seen firsthand how raising a flock of 20 chickens or even less contributes to a family's food security. It could provide a household with nutritionally rich food sources. You can get over 80 eggs a week and bring in a small source of income, which you could then use to buy other food that you needed. In a 2017 study done by Dr. Odie and James Hollier called the 20 egg layers model, which was published by University of Guam, it describes the many benefits of a 20-layer grower could provide eggs for 7 households. That's a dozen eggs per household per week, which results in meeting about 65% of the island's need for eggs if supplied by 14% of the population who are engaged in this model. So currently the 50-foot rule restriction doesn't allow for many families to participate in these opportunities, or if they do so in violation of the current rules. Raising chickens is not costly to get started. Therefore, it would be more accessible to vulnerable groups. Economically, physically, or socially disadvantaged populations should have this opportunity. And people with limited resources, poultry may be the only livestock they can keep. It's an activity that the whole family could be involved in. The children can help with taking care of the chickens. They can even own their own chickens. It could help empower more women. If they own their own production, they would have control over their food security and control over their income. The chicken manure used in a safe way can be used as a valuable organic source of fertilizer, and it's very effective in pest control. So introducing poultry to already existing home gardens helps to enhance a homestead food production and allow for efficient use of resources. I do have to say on February 23rd next week, we are partnering with Farm to Table, and the Department of Ag is going to present to our network of farmers on effective waste management plans. And so for those reasons, we feel that the legislation being considered helps to remove barriers to food security for families and our island. We are in support of favorable consideration by this committee and eventually the Guam legislature as a whole. Again, thank you for the opportunity. Suzus Maasi.
Zeus Masi, Michelle, for your testimony. So the next on the list, we have Thalia Ganji from Farm to Table to provide testimony.
Thank you so much. Michelle said everything that I wanted to say, and I just wanted to add one more thought kind of along that lines, and in response to an earlier comment about farming having a place only in certain areas. But I do want to say, to a certain extent, I agree that, certain things should be kept in certain areas. However, because we are trying to restore the love of farming to our people, because it was lost in the 1920s, and many people forgot how to farm, and we need to remember how to farm and teach our people to farm again. There's a need to teach our children from the time they are growing up. What is farming? What are animals? How do you grow vegetables? How are the animals related to that? I see that backyard chickens are really important. And it may sound silly to some people, but just having them present in a well-managed way is really important. And you don't have to have a lot. Having 5 or 6 chickens in your backyard and having your children watch you manage them effectively in a clean way, so that they can see how they're grown, how they get the eggs, how you move and manage the manure so there is no smell. And we have that, and we don't have a smell in our yard at all. And we take the manure and we manage it into our garden effectively. This is very important, and it teaches a love of the farming. So when they grow up, they don't see that farming is something that is to be downgraded, or that's not something to be proud of. Farming is a proud profession, and people can grow up and do this. This is very different from like my husband's generation. He said that that was not something that they were taught. They were taught to grow up and leave the farm. And so we don't want that in this next generation. We want our children to love farming and to be proud of it. And so I think it's very important to have these animals present around us. Now, I'm not saying that they should be in the apartment building. Ernie is correct. There are certain places that we really just shouldn't have chickens or livestock, but there's areas where they can be well managed, and it should be appropriate to where we are. So, that's something to be considered as well. But, let's have them where we are. Let's have them around our homes. Thank you so much.
This is Masi, Mrs. Ganji. So let me see what's on the record now. So for the record, sorry, is there anybody else here to testify on Bill 195-36? Okay. Okay, yes, I see John Borja from Department of Ag. You're recognized.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me? And good morning, all Sen Joe and fellow committee members. I'm basically in support of this bill in a sense that it promotes sustainability, food security, and whatnot. However, I'm also concerned about sanitation practices, where the livestock will be raised, for example, and all that can come together as we work together to a program to identify space requirements as well as regulatory issues that may be of concern. It is a very big challenge right now, and part of the problems that we have now on farms are vandalism, and people steal to eat, people steal to make ways in their lives to live. And having a small garden, we can substitute invasive species flowers for herbs and other stuff that we can grow along the window sills and stuff like that, for example, or small areas. But again, yes, there is a real concern about the environment, how it affects the neighbors and stuff like that. But we can all come together and come up with an adoption of a program that will regulate and give the best that we can for the space that they have and the needs of the people. Because I farm myself, and whatever I have, I don't give to the market. I give it away because I see a lot of people that are struggling. And this is a plus to not only grow the industry in a small scale, but to provide something back to the people that are actually have big challenges in food security and to sustain themselves through this hardship. Again, we're in a challenging situation right now with the pandemic, but because most people are also unemployed, they literally can't even afford to buy gas. So this is another alternative to keep them motivated, keep them occupied fiscally, so that they can be able to outdo with their what you call it, the communicable diseases that we try to prevent in regards to staying fit. So part of this also is the exercise in going back to agriculture is one thing, but we can also provide a learning curve for our kids to grow up to be farmers, for future farmers of Guam. Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you, Mr. Borja. So for the record, requests for feedback on Bill 195-36 COR were also sent to the following agencies or entities: Guam Land Use Commission, Department of Land Management, Guam Environmental Protection Agency, University of Guam Center for Island Sustainability. The committee is in receipt of written testimony on Bill 195-36 from the following: Jennifer Peralta, as well as Dr. John Jensen. Let's see. Okay, so as far as Legal Bureau's review recommendations, it's still pending. The fiscal note impact, the Bureau of Budget and Management Research stated in its fiscal impact note that based on comments received from Department of Agriculture, the passage of Bill 195-36 will not add any burdensome costs to the department, but may increase workload for Agricultural Development Services section. They further add that the legislation has a potential to generate revenue for the Agricultural Development Services section should the fees for permits be raised, which they anticipate will be addressed during a future public hearing. Okay. So notes. Okay. So now we proceed to the questions. This is a question for Department of Ag or the sponsor of the bill. Has the input of mayors been sought on concerns with the proposed removal of 50 feet requirement and the potential for complaints by neighbors, residents, especially in villages with compact or tight housing areas, duplexes, or apartments. So in Hawaii, for instance, the number of chickens allowed in a residential area is 2. So perhaps Director Brecht, if you have any responses to that question?
Yes, ma'am. We have spoken to individual mayors about the bill, and they were all in largely in support of it, because this is different from, as I think it was Thalia or maybe Michelle who had pointed out, families are now collecting chickens that are stray chickens. But with the process that Guam Sustainable has and that we've worked with other constituents on, people are ordering egg-laying chickens or meat chickens, and those can be sexed. So number one, it's the males that hawk or crow loudly and cause it. So in our family's raising of egg-laying birds, we don't have any roosters, so we don't have that noise. But when ADS, or Agriculture Development Services, conducts meetings with individuals who would apply for this certification, or even through the bona fide process, you assess the amount of space that they have and then provide guidance on the number of chickens. So if someone was living in a small residential area, like in Barragata Heights, let's say, and they're on less than a quarter acre, we wouldn't be encouraging them to raise 20 chickens. It would probably be as many as needed for their family, which typically goes between 4 to 5 birds. And then, as Thalia had pointed out, if you manage the waste, which is what is included in this bill, the obligation to develop a waste management plan, and then you have our community supported agriculture entities like Farm to Table and Guam Sustainable that are going to conduct workshops with us, with the Department of Agriculture for the community. You teach people how to manage the waste so that it becomes a commodity instead of a nuisance to the community. For our family, we always collected the basically chicken poo, the takimanok, and we use it, you mix it with either grass that you've already cut or shredded paper, or other instances like coffee, and it becomes a very viable fertilizer. And sometimes those are even the same. I mean, people go and buy bat guano for a reason. It's nutrient rich. And the same can be said for chicken manure as well. And we already know of families that are raising these chickens. And like with the prior bill, we have people that are already engaged in this process. We're just trying to help them do it in a more sustainable and manageable way and decriminalize it for them. A lot of residential areas don't have 50 feet of space away from the home to raise chickens, but they're doing it right next to their home. So we want to teach them to do it in a clean and healthy manner for their family and support them in doing it rather than creating obstacles for them.
Okay, thank you for that response, Director. Okay, so who will be responsible? This question is for you as well. Who will be responsible for ensuring that waste management plans are being complied with?
Our agency will.
Okay. And what are the environmental standards that will guide the approval of applications for keeping of poultry or fowl and aquaculture aquaponic systems?
Well, it would be different for each, but we would determine the size that is manageable for the family living area, recommend the number of chickens or the number of fish that they would use in their aquaculture system, and also provide guidance on the type of plants that they would use to be raised with their aquaculture systems, and then either guide them to resources to help develop the management plan and then review that and approve it with them, or help them create it if there's someone who has challenges in finding the resources for themselves.
Okay.
And there are strict guidelines that are easily manageable, that create clean, usable compost from the manure. It's not something that's overly scientific or complex. I taught my kids to do it. And then they sold the eggs and raised money for themselves to buy things that they needed. And it absolutely does help with buying more produce or groceries for your family.
Yeah, I did teach permaculture, so I'm very aware of, the interplay of things. And I think it's really about restoring that relationship, right? But I think
Regenerative agriculture, yes.
and I think too, though, there's, it's food security is such an important thing for Guam. And, I've always envisioned, if we can all produce food in our backyard to increase self-sufficiency. And, that's kind of like a dream, but, there's a lot of issues that, we have to address too. Like, Guam is an island, it's a small island, and, we live above our aquifer. So, we have to also be mindful of the ecosystem that we're potentially impacting, right? So, yeah, I mean, permaculture in the States is very different from permaculture here on Guam. And, I'm all for like that urban permaculture type thing, but yeah, also in the context of Guam, what do we have to be aware of, and how do we protect the island too, as well as sustain ourselves? So, these are definitely considerations that have to be made. But yeah, and as far as like environmental standards, yeah, I think management, this idea of self-regulating. I mean, I think a lot of you here today are very, advocates for, very, very environmentally focused. But yeah, I think it's also, we have to balance a lot of these concerns too that are being brought up in this hearing. So yeah, definitely, this is something that's going to require a little bit more, I think, more fine tuning to get to.
I'm sorry, Senator.
Yeah, so I mean, this idea that we have to import eggs, right? Thousands of miles, the idea of food miles, right? And that adds to climate change. That's, I think it's, yeah, we can produce here, we should do it. And yeah, what is it? We import 90% of our food. We should be more self-sufficient for sure. And I think if there's a way we can balance these concerns, from protecting, providing food for our families, maybe income as well, and then also protecting the environment. I think there's all these considerations that we have to make. But yeah, did you want to say something, Director Brown?
I was just thinking I completely agree with you. I mean, this agency works really hard on doing a lot of management so that we protect our natural resources, to include our water and drinking system. I am wary and optimistic at the same time that we can all recognize that families raising few birds, I doubt that any of them would ever get to 20, because you just don't want that. You just don't. If you raise chickens, you don't want 20 in your little less than quarter acre lot. It's too many, and that would be more eggs than you can even handle, really. But that them raising that many eggs, or even having aquaculture systems, and I want to explain that the aquaculture systems are not these large, massive systems. And it was actually Michelle's dad who showed me the little system that they had set up running out of a cooler. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about creating systems that families are using to feed themselves. They're not large 10, 15 foot, 20 foot tanks that they're going to be posting up in their backyards, but little systems operating out of coolers and those plastic containers with maybe 2 to 3 fish inside that allow them to grow tens of pounds of produce for their family. That these are not systems that will be large contributors to the degradation of our waterlands or our water systems. That there are so many other things happening around our island right now that are either not being managed or regulated that we all know are contributing to the degradation of our water systems. And it's not going to be even the thousands of families in between Mangilao and Jigo, or Mangilao and Talafofo, that want to raise even at the most 10 chickens in their yard. And if we get at least 50% of them to manage their waste, the other 50% that aren't going to be, and I'm exaggerating numbers here, are not going to be as substantial of contributors as some of the other industries that are occurring right now.
Okay. Let me go on to the questions. I know, Mr. Nadeau, you had your hand raised up. I can recognize you at this time.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Point of clarity, this is Chapter 35, Title 10 GCA. That is the mandate of the Division of Environmental Health. So it will be the Division of Public Health that will be responding to this complaint, not Department of Agriculture. I just want to make that clear. Second, and I think this is where a lot of people may be confused because the way the bill is presented. Currently, the law does allow, this particular section does allow the raising of up to 20 chickens. It's allowed. Now, I'm not taking a position on that at this time. What I am taking position is that we are opposing the removal of the 50-foot distancing of the as proposed in this bill. So people are currently raising 20 chickens, up to 20 chickens, but there is a restriction to that it cannot be less than 50 feet from the nearest building. And I mentioned that in the public in our testimony. And though we like to think that people are responsible, we have responsible neighbors and property owners, but in reality, we do not. We respond to complaints, and the complaints are legitimate. They've been confirmed that some people just do not raise their chickens in a sanitary manner. And some of these chickens that are, if you will, confined is generally away from the individual's home. They put it far away as possible, the 20 chickens. And that usually means along the border of their property, which means it's close to their neighbor's property. So it's actually closer to their neighbor than the property owners themselves. So now we have complaints from the neighbor saying, one, they have too many chickens, which sometimes is true. Second, it is just literally along their property line, right? And near their own dwelling. And granted, there are some individuals who raise chicken for the eggs, but there are some that raise for, let's not kid ourselves, cockfighting, and they crow. Roosters crow. So try to imagine you're residing on a residential property and your neighbor and their 20 chickens placed there all along their fence line, though they may be well maintained in terms of sanitation. Well, I'm not a subject matter on chickens, but I can imagine 20 chickens crowing day and night and you're trying to sleep, have a restful sleep. That is a public nuisance, folks. And we get complaints like that and we respond to them and we do our best. And the best we can do is, yes, the individuals allow 20 chickens, but yet they have to maintain it 50 feet away. So that's the best we can do. But even at that, I mean, a lot of these properties, residential properties, are not like giant agricultural sized lots. These are like quarter size, lots. And, you have your house there, so you have limited space to begin with. And where are you going to put them? Closest to either your dwelling or their dwelling. It's one thing you want to risk potential environmental hazards by placing your property, but how about your neighbors? Because that's included in the 50-foot distancing. So I think we need to take that into consideration. I mean, we're not against sustainability, but we are pro environmental health and protecting the public. And removal of this provision is just open up further problems for environmental health and their exposure to environmental hazards. Like I said, we all like to believe our neighbors are, understanding and that they care of the chicken if they have some. But 20 chicken along their fence line near your property, I think that could get on anyone's nerves. And essentially, it's a public nuisance. Thank you. I just want to make that comment. Thank you.
Mr. Joe, I've been given the signal that I have 30 minutes, so I need to move along. So let me give an opportunity for my colleagues to ask questions or provide comments. Senator Joanne Brown.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I often think when we pursue these, different pieces of legislation, sometimes we don't collectively build up a presentation. So not just legislators, but the public can have an understanding of what's being proposed. For those of you that are engaged in this, it's wonderful. It's such a great idea. And by all means, we should put it in place. But the reality is, our ability as a government to regulate is wow, we're so behind on so much. And as mentioned by the Director of Agriculture, yes, there are many unregulated activities that are occurring in this community that our government should be regulating that are, detrimental to human health and the environment. So I don't know how we're going to collectively address how we're going to regulate this. When you deal with many complaints from residents, or you're in a job where you have to deal with complaints from residents, I'm sure Mr. Nadeau, with just his most recent comments, is relaying some of that. I can hear the tone of frustration I'm sure he has to deal with in responding to complaints. We have a very good idea, but how do we implement it in a way that's going to minimize issues and problems? Not everybody follows the rules, even in the best of circumstances. We wish they did. We wish everyone had the best of intentions. That's not the case. And when you're the one saddled with having to do the enforcement, and I've been in jobs where I've had to do enforcement, it's a very difficult thing to do. And we deal with it very poorly. We'll come up and say, oh, we don't have enough resources, we don't have enough personnel. But what you do end up having are residents that complain. And certainly I'm going to talk to my mayor, because I appreciate the fact that the discussions have happened with the mayors out there. But there are reasons, there are zoning requirements, because there are issues that are going to be created. If you are able to minimize the issue and you're not dealing with a bunch of, crowing roosters, then great. But, we all see them running around all over the place. The only thing is we don't take possession of them, so we're not personally responsible for them. I think the ideas are wonderful. If we're able to implement it, we're able to, have proper, sanitation, and we're able to recycle, the takimanuk, as the director referred to it, then great. I think that's wonderful, people that are able to do. But I think in general, I don't know if our community is in place to do that. Maybe more outreach and awareness can help facilitate. But the complaints from residents, especially if you're living in communities where homes are close to each other, you're talking quarter-acre lots. Not everybody has a quarter-acre lot. If I live in Baza Gardens, I most definitely do not have a quarter-acre lot. If I live in Kaiser, where there's already illegal, possession of animals on their property within such small areas, adjacent to each other. I mean, you could, literally touch your neighbor's house. That's going to be a concern. And so I think we need to move forward. And I think there's a lot of good ways to do this. Simply passing this bill, I don't think is going to resolve it. I think it's going to solve some issues for those that are very good advocates of wanting to pursue this. And it all sounds good. I mean, gosh, food security, it's all positive. But there's other consequences here that I don't believe the government has the infrastructure to address at this time. And unless there's a way that we can do that effectively, I mean, water quality, as Ms. Lujan brought up, is a very important thing. And our water lens every day is challenged with so many issues because of our inability for regulatory agents. And parts of northern Guam EPA probably hasn't visited in forever. That we are not addressing protection of that resource. So, I mean, having 10 chickens or whatever, do I have a big issue with that, for laying eggs? I mean, I think it's I think for kids, it would be a wonderful thing to have. But our ability to regulate properly, ensure that, our residents are all responsible and that we don't have neighbors that are going to complain. I don't see that as being the reality right now. And I think we're going to end up with complaints from neighbors. We ended up with complaints of neighbors now. I remember on the back road to Anderson, there was a piggery that was in place, and it's on agricultural property, was there for many, many, many years doing what it was intended to do. And as you've noticed on the back road, the development of houses has continued to grow in the last 30 years, and all these homes grew around the piggery. And what did a lot of the homeowners do? Complained about the piggery that had been there since before time, before all those residential homes were built, exactly in its zoning, producing and doing what it was intended to do. And yet the outrage of the community because of the smell, the this, the that, when you're the one at the receiving end of that and have to go do enforcement, good luck to you. So I think this is a very good idea. I think it would have been more helpful to show the community and do more community outreach, and even for legislators like myself to go out and even see, how does this operate? How is this workable so that it's a contained system that's not going to become a nuisance to your neighbor? We can't regulate. We were just talking not too long ago about junk cars in the front yard, junk cars on public easement in front of homes. Let's go to every housing development on Guam. Unless you're the multi-millionaire community, odds are fairly good. You got junk cars within the street in front of houses right now that residents complain about. So I think it's a great concept. I think a lot more outreach needs to be done because, again, I've been recipients. I've heard the complaints. I hear it. It's out there. And I don't know how we can effectively regulate this. That's the concern. And it's a sad reality that, most people, there's a lot of good people out there, but most people, left to their own devices, don't necessarily always follow the rules if there's no enforcement. So while I see it's a very good concept, very good idea, I also see at the other end that I don't feel enough sense of comfort level of knowing how this is going to minimize issues of concerns and complaints from adjacent neighbors that live literally next door, that live within feet of a residence. I mean, not everybody has a quarter acre lot, not everybody has an acre lot, not everybody has a half acre lot. that their homes are sitting on. And that's the reason why we have these, we have zoning requirements. And if we want to transcend zoning requirements, then gosh, we have to have a better system in place to minimize the very problems that people within their own residential home have an expectation of a certain quality of life. So I don't know at this point. I'm not quite sure one way or the other how I'm going to vote on this bill. Maybe more information and setting examples, showing examples how this can be done, and doing more community outreach may absolve some of those issues. But from the regulatory side, our government fails consistently to deal with even greater threats. We have greater threats than chickens out there, and we're not even dealing with that now. So I don't know how we're going to properly regulate this to minimize issues among neighbors. And like I said, ultimately, we want quality of life issues. So the whole idea and the concept, I think, is wonderful. Our ability to implement it right now for me is kind of questionable. So with that, Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity to comment on this bill.
All right, thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Terlaje, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate everyone being here today. And I have to commend Chelsea for all the work you're doing at Department of Agriculture for outreach and encouraging people to do this type of farming, do this kind of raising of sustainability, everything that you've been working very hard at Department of Agriculture. But I too share some concerns about the environmental perspective of everything moving forward. I'd like to do it right. As we make a step forward to something like this, let's do it the right way first. And one of the things I'm concerned about, Chelsea, and I have to ask with regards to the Department of Agriculture and the resource, do they have the resources necessary to regulate compliance or respond to any of these complaints? Do you have the resources?
Well, thank you for the question, Senator. First, we don't receive the complaints about chickens, I guess, or from complaining neighbors. What we do know is that there are those who are raising chickens right now, despite the existence of the current law. And there are programs that are helping families to raise chickens, like Guam Sustainable's program. And some of these families have been doing it without realizing that they're even violating any law. So what we're trying to do is set up a process so that we can help families like that. Everything that's happening already is happening regardless of the statute. And we do have the staff that go out. We've streamlined our bona fide certificate process. So now we've also been hiring, with the support of the legislature, staff for this section. So we've increased their capacity to conduct inspections. We're in the process of hiring, I think, 2 more individuals that would help with this. So I would like to say that, yes, we do have the capacity and the staff to conduct inspections for the purposes of helping families establish chickens or aquaculture systems for food security, which is our primary goal. We don't get calls from people raising chickens for cockfighting at all.
I'm sure.
Well, not for those raising them. We get calls from people who want us to stop letting them in. But that's a whole different issue. But the intention for us, at least with this bill, is to help those who are already in existence in violation of the law, and to help them set up a system that would make it more sustainable and manageable and not harmful to the environment or our resources. And then also to provide education for those who would like to get into something like this.
Yeah. Sounds good, but it sounds like that they're not in place right now. The resources to do this type of work on inspecting is not in place until you hire those individuals to assist you.
We have people who are already conducting the inspections now. We have 1, 2, 3, roughly 5 people right now who go out and conduct farm inspections.
Okay.
And that's who would be conducting these inspections.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier that you're looking at hiring additional individuals.
Yes.
Okay, and then you do have them on board. Okay, that's good to hear. My other concern is, working together with, EPA as well as Public Work. And thank you, Vanji, for being here. I think she was here early. There she is, Vanji Lujan, for providing your testimony on something like this. It's not always that we have GWA here, and I appreciate you putting your input. So, Chelsea, you mentioned how you are going to provide this information or inspections, and are you going to be working with EPA and Public Works and Waterworks Waterworks Authority? in creating this, because I had the same question with regards to the management plan submitted by the homeowners to Department of Ed on waste management. That was a concern. So what kind of strides have you made so far in contacting GWA and EPA on this type of management system that's in the bill that's supposed to be in place?
Well, we maintain a regular relationship with EPA because we also help with conducting inspections for pesticide use. We haven't had the opportunity to actually help anyone based on this law now because that's not part of the process. But if it becomes part of the process, then absolutely we will engage in those relationships and conversations with them about this specifically. In terms of waste management for the chickens and the processes that we would use for it, we would absolutely be happy to share that information with GWA, but I think the size, I mean, if it may help, then maybe the language of the bill needs to be adjusted to make it, well, I mean, it already says up to 20. And although that's the number that's been set historically in the statute, that's just not the number that's utilized by people in smaller locations. Mm-hmm. It's not. You're not going to live in a little lot in Kaiser with 20 egg-laying birds, to be specific, because it's just too many for your family. People who have more than that number of birds are typically not following the law.
Well, the bill says that Bill 195 requires a waste management and influent management plan to be submitted to the owners, to the Department of, from the
absolutely.
Yeah. So that's what I mean. It's so important that you work with these agencies, Waterworks as well as EPA and Public Works as well. Of course, public health, most especially, you know, in creating this waste management plan. That's my concern. And I think if that was, you know, done before anything else, I mean, it's, you know, you don't want to put the cart before the carabao. So plans should be put in place first before we move onto something like this. Other than that, a lot of the questions that I had, I'm sorry, Chelsea, go ahead. Did you say something?
I was just going to say the plans would have to be individualized. I mean, it's not one big plan that you would kind of put on top of everybody to implement. Each home would have a different plan or different method that they'd like to use. For example, because I live in an agriculturally zoned area with a larger area, we can use green waste as a management tool. For someone in an urban area, that might not be an option. So it might be more of collecting shredded paper or producing their own shredded paper. What we'd also like to really do is partner different government agencies with individuals. We try to collect shredded paper here that we then disperse to the farmers, but it may be more efficient and reduce carbon output if we had people picking up directly from agencies and we could facilitate those relationships. And then that shredded paper then turns into a commodity because you can use it to grow produce or even restore the soil to higher levels of nutrient holding.
I really appreciate, especially the educational part of this, you know, and anybody getting into this line of, you know, farming or raising of livestock. It's important to be well educated on the possibilities and the concerns, especially that were reached in this public hearing right now. And I appreciate the work that you're doing. You know, that's pretty much it. The dialogue was excellent. And, you know, just to share something that happened yesterday with regards to roosters and chickens, as I was going to Caliente, I was sitting out in my car waiting for my order to pick up my order. There were at least 8 chickens out there, a couple roosters, you know, that were just grazing, you know, near this business, you know, and I'm thinking, wow, is this business raising chickens and maybe they're cutting them up and serving them at Calientes, or, you know, not quite sure what's going on. But I just so happened to be calling the mayor of Hagåtña, and he was telling me he was getting complaints from even his small constituents that he has there, but people were complaining and businesses were complaining. And then he was mentioning that even people have been selling these wild chickens that have been out and around. I mean, it doesn't look like it belongs to anybody, but literally taking them, killing them, and taking them to the flea market and selling them for $5. And I was, are you kidding me? You know, it made me think of like bottle bills or, you know, taking these excess chickens that don't belong to anybody, you know, and it's quite ironic. And the last one is, Michelle, when you brought up the Barragata Heights scenario. My father lives in Barragata Heights, and when I picked him up the other day, the roosters were crazy going, and he starts to laugh. And my father, I mean, grew up in Inalahan where chickens are, you know, it's a normal thing. And he says, well, the orchestra has started singing today. And it was loud. So there is, I mean, it's becoming more and more chickens are everywhere, you know, in the business sectors as well as the residential. So I think this is something good that we're talking about now, and try to focus in on making this a win-win for everyone and keep our environment safe, most especially to keep a safe environment. And thank you, while promoting, you know, agriculture. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Chadwick. Senator Rajel, for questions and closing comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do I have enough time? There might only be 10 minutes.
Yeah, we have 12 minutes. Yeah, so my apologies.
So I only get 12 minutes?
I guess, yeah. Or maybe we can extend it, but yeah, try to do your best.
All right, here goes. I have a question for Mrs. Lujan with regards to the backflow preventer. What other things require a backflow preventer?
Typically anything connected to our system that may backflow into our system. So things like swimming pools, farmers, we work with Michelle to install a backflow preventer in the farmer because of the fertilizer that's being used. Water tanks, many water tanks, when they install it, they have to put in a backflow preventer. Anytime you have any kind of farming activity, you need a backflow, but especially with aquaculture. And so the size would just depend, because sometimes you could use, there's like valves that you can get, and so you don't have to get the entire assembly. But our backflow preventer expert and tester will work with you to size it appropriately. And so sometimes on spigots, you'll see like this little device that's on it, connected to your hose. That's like a valve that reduces the pressure, so that way it doesn't seep back in. So it's not that it's going to be very expensive. It's something you could probably get at Home Depot. But for these types of activities, especially when you're using any kind of chemical or things, even waste products, there's a possibility of contaminants entering into our system via these hoses or sprinklers. So sprinkler systems also have to have them as well. There's a list within our regulations.
What's the range of costs for backflow preventers?
I'm sorry, I do not know.
Like a minimum range and then a maximum. Do you know like just the range at least?
No, I'm sorry, I don't.
Okay, no problem.
I could get that information to you.
Yes, I would be interested in that. Thank you, I appreciate it. Since I'm running out of time here, I'm gonna go ahead and close. Thank you, Ms. Lujan, for your testimony. Thank you, everyone, for your testimony today.
Sorry, one more thing. My apologies, Senator Mary Torres. If you have any quick questions or comments, my apologies, Senator Rachel.
Oh, okay, yes.
No, thank you, Madam Chair. Everything's covered. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Okay, thank you, Senator Rajel. You're recognized.
Right, you took some time off my clock. Can you add it back? No? All right. So, I appreciate all the testimony today, but I am a bit concerned of some of the testimony that is against the measure. And here's why. We seem to be very quick to focus on regulating the little guy. I've heard a lot of, concerns, everything from let's start with the aquifer. So we're concerned about how this could affect the aquifer. Meanwhile, we have a military base sitting directly on top of an aquifer. a military base that has been known to contaminate said aquifer for many years now. It's been proven to have contaminated said aquifer when certain wells have been shut down in the past. So we're okay with a giant military base. Literally, it's an industrial complex sitting on top of our only aquifer, but we're concerned about people raising chickens or maybe a little bit of aquaponics in the backyard. Ooh, that might destroy the aquifer. No one seems to worry that there's a military base that might destroy the aquifer, or do we? PCBs, PFAS, TCBs, jet fuel, all of these things are present on the military base and have been found in our aquifer in the past. But we're concerned about chickens? Chickens. That brings me to the noise issue. So we're concerned about noise, people complaining about noise from chickens. We've got military planes and military helicopters flying overhead almost daily. We've got exercises every day now. I hear complaints about that all the time. We're concerned about chickens. We're concerned about the natural feathered birds more than we are about the metallic giant birds. Those are some of my concerns with regards to some of the testimony today. It seems to be aimed at sort of picking on the low-hanging fruit, so to speak. Sure, it's easy. It's easy to pick on the low-hanging fruit. Easy to pick the low-hanging fruit, excuse me. It's easy to pick on the little guy. Meanwhile, we're just blind to all these huge things that are truly affecting our quality of life on Guam. This is where we got to make a decision here. Which way are we going to drive the island of Guam? Are we going to drive the island of Guam towards a place where people can raise their own food? That's all we're talking about here. Raising your own food for food security. Sometimes I think it's like we want the public to be dependent. We want the public to beg for handouts from Uncle Sam. Is that what we want? Or do we want to empower our people to be able to grow their own food? Or do we want to rely again on Uncle Sam and rely on those metallic birds to bring food into the island? This is why I'm pushing for measures like this. And I know that people, regulators are concerned, but I just feel sometimes it's a little bit of nitpicking on little things here and there when there's much, much bigger fish to fry. You know, we're headed down a path where pretty soon our only form of economic viability, it's already our only real form of economic viability right now, are two things: tourism and the military. We talk about diversification of economy. Let's diversify, let's diversify. Do we really mean it, or is it all just talk? For me, it's not talk. For me, I put my money where my mouth is. For me, I will put my name, everything on the line for what I believe in. Because I believe in agriculture. And I believe Guam can be self-sustaining. And I believe we can empower our people to grow their own food so that we're not dependent upon handouts. Let's give our people a hand up. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Rigel. So there being no additional individuals to present further testimony, this committee will consider Bill 195-36 COR duly heard. The committee will remain open for the submission of additional written testimony on Bill 193 and 195 for the next 10 working days following this hearing up until March 2nd, 2022. Testimony can be sent via email to senator.terlaje@gmail.com or hand delivered to the offices here at the Guam Congress Building. The public hearing is now adjourned. The time is now 11:58 a.m. Saduas Masi and have a great day.